My family thought they could steal my childhood home while I was deployed overseas, giving it to my sister because she has kids. They had no idea the deed was in my company's name and what I was really capable of. Captain Marcus Rodriguez had been looking forward to this moment for 18 months. After 3 grueling tours in Afghanistan, he was finally coming home to Colorado Springs. At 34, Marcus had built something most soldiers only dreamed of, a successful cybersecurity consulting firm called Sentinel Defense Solutions that he'd started while stationed stateside between deployments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What made it even more special was that the business was registered to his childhood address, 1247 Maple Grove Drive, the Victorian house his grandmother had left him when he was just 22. The house held everything Marcus treasured. It was where his grandmother Elena had raised him after his parents proved too irresponsible to handle a child. It was where he'd studied for his computer science degree using the GI Bill. Most importantly, it was where he'd built his company from a laptop in the basement, slowly growing it into a multi-million-dollar operation that provided cybersecurity for government contracts and Fortune 500 companies. Marcus had always been the quiet one in the family, the responsible one who cleaned up everyone else's messes. While his sister Jessica bounced between jobs and relationships, Marcus had been methodically building his future. His parents, Robert and Linda Rodriguez, had always favored Jessica, constantly bailing her out of financial troubles while barely acknowledging Marcus's achievements. But Marcus didn't mind. He had his house, his business, and his independence. The Denver International Airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers, but Marcus felt a deep sense of peace as he collected his single duffel bag from baggage claim. He'd kept his homecoming deliberately quiet. No family pickup, no big announcements. He wanted to surprise them, to walk into his house and finally relax in his own space. His company had been running smoothly under his trusted partner and CTO, David Kim, but Marcus was eager to get back to hands-on work. He'd arranged for an Uber to take him straight to Maple Grove Drive. The September Colorado air would be crisp and perfect, and he could already imagine sitting on his grandmother's old porch swing, reviewing business proposals and planning the next phase of expansion for Sentinel Defense Solutions. The company had grown beyond his wildest dreams while he was deployed. 3 new major contracts, 12 employees, and gross revenues approaching 8 figures. As the Uber wound through the familiar neighborhoods of his childhood, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. Unlike many of his fellow veterans who struggled with the transition to civilian life, he had built something stable and meaningful. His cybersecurity expertise, honed through military intelligence work, had translated perfectly into the private sector. Government agencies and corporations paid top dollar for the kind of security protocols Marcus had developed. The Uber pulled up to 1247 Maple Grove Drive at 3:47 p.m. on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Marcus paid the driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, admiring the Victorian house that represented everything he'd worked for. The wraparound porch, the bay windows, the carefully maintained garden, it all looked exactly as he'd left it. He'd hired a property management company to handle maintenance while deployed, and they'd clearly done excellent work. Marcus pulled out his keys, the same set his grandmother had given him 12 years ago. He'd carried them through 3 combat zones, a constant reminder of what he was fighting to protect and return to. The weight of them in his palm felt like coming home. He walked up the front steps, noting that the porch swing where he'd spent countless evenings coding looked freshly painted. He was reaching for the front door when something stopped him cold. There was a different lock on the door, not just changed completely different hardware. Marcus frowned, thinking perhaps the property management company had upgraded security. He tried his key anyway, but it didn't even fit the new lock. Confused but not yet alarmed, he walked around to the back door, where he'd always kept a spare key hidden under a loose board on the deck. The back door had been changed too, and the spare key was gone. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Rocky Mountain Property Management, the company he'd been paying $800 a month to maintain his house. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He left a message explaining the situation and asking for an immediate callback. Something felt wrong, but he tried to stay rational. Maybe there had been a break-in attempt, and they'd changed the locks for security reasons. He walked around the house, peering through windows. The furniture was different, not just rearranged, completely different. His grandmother's antique dining set was gone, replaced by a modern table he didn't recognize. His home office, where he'd built Sentinel Defense Solutions, had been converted into what looked like a child's playroom. Through the bay window, he could see toys scattered across the hardwood floors he'd refinished himself. Marcus's military training had taught him to gather information before reacting. He pulled out his phone and opened the property management app, checking his account. His last payment had been processed 3 weeks ago, same as always. According to their system, everything was normal, but clearly it wasn't. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, was working in her garden. Marcus had known her since childhood. She'd been his grandmother's best friend. He walked over, forcing his face into a calm expression despite the growing knot in his stomach. "Mrs. Patterson, it's Marcus Rodriguez. I just got back from Afghanistan." The elderly woman looked up and her face immediately showed confusion and something that looked like pity. "Oh, Marcus. Honey, didn't your family tell you?" She set down her gardening shears, wiping her hands on her apron with the slow, deliberate movements of someone preparing to deliver bad news. Marcus felt his stomach drop. In 18 months of combat zones, he'd learned to read body language, and Mrs. Patterson's expression told him everything he needed to know before she even spoke. Something was very, very wrong. "Tell me what, Mrs. Patterson?" His voice remained steady, but his mind was already racing through possibilities. Had something happened to the house? Had there been a fire, a break-in, some kind of emergency that required changing everything? The elderly woman glanced around nervously, as if she was afraid of being overheard. "Marcus, your sister Jessica moved in about 6 months ago. She's been living there with her 3 kids and that boyfriend of hers, Danny. Your parents..." She paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase what came next. "Your parents told everyone in the neighborhood that they'd given her the house, said you were never coming back, that you'd decided to stay in the military permanently." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His sister had been living in his house, the house that legally belonged to his company, for 6 months, while he'd been sending monthly payments to the property management company, while he'd been planning his return, while he'd been dreaming of sitting on his grandmother's porch swing. "They said what?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping to the quiet, controlled tone that his soldiers had learned meant their captain was furious but maintaining discipline. Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely distressed. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. I thought maybe you'd agreed to it, given the circumstances with Jessica's divorce and the kids needing stability. But the way your parents talked about it, they made it sound like you'd signed papers, made it official." Marcus's mind was working through the implications with the same methodical precision he'd used to analyze security threats in Afghanistan. His parents had lied to the entire neighborhood. They'd moved his sister into his house without his knowledge or consent, and they'd told everyone he was never coming back. "Have you seen any moving trucks? Any official paperwork being served?" Marcus asked, his military training kicking in as he gathered intelligence. "Well, yes, actually. About a month ago, there was a lot of activity. Jessica had some men come and remove a bunch of furniture. She said it was old stuff that needed to go. And just last week, I saw her showing some real estate agent around the property. She mentioned something about needing to finalize the transfer so she could refinance." Refinance? The word sent a chill down Marcus's spine. If Jessica was trying to refinance the property, she would need to prove ownership, which meant she would have discovered, or was about to discover, that the deed wasn't in the family name at all. It was registered to Sentinel Defense Solutions, LLC. Marcus had structured it that way on purpose when he'd inherited the house. His military lawyers had advised him that holding the property through his company would provide better tax advantages and legal protections, especially given his frequent deployments. The house served as his company's official headquarters, and every month Sentinel Defense Solutions paid property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs as legitimate business expenses. "Mrs. Patterson, do you know if Jessica is home right now?" The elderly woman nodded toward the house. "She should be. I saw her car in the driveway this morning, and the kids were playing in the backyard around lunchtime. Marcus, honey, I have to ask, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus managed a tight smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson, just processing some unexpected news. Thank you for telling me the truth." As he walked back toward his house, Marcus felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before leading his unit into complex operations in Afghanistan. His family had made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed he was the same passive, accommodating Marcus, who'd always cleaned up their messes without complaint. They had no idea that 3 tours of duty had transformed him into someone who planned for every contingency, who documented everything, and who never entered a situation without understanding all the angles. More importantly, they had no idea about Sentinel Defense Solutions. To them, Marcus was just their quiet son who'd joined the army and disappeared overseas. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They didn't know about the multi-million-dollar company, the government contracts, or the legal framework he'd carefully constructed to protect his assets. As he approached the front door of 1247 Maple Grove Drive, the address that appeared on every Sentinel Defense Solutions contract, every business license, every legal document, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to his lawyer's contact information. David Chen, his corporate attorney, answered on the second ring. "Marcus, welcome back, man. How was the flight?" "David, I need you to prepare an emergency consultation. I'm standing outside my house, and my family has apparently been squatting in it for 6 months." There was a pause. "The house that's registered as Sentinel's headquarters? The property we use for your business address? That's the one. Marcus." David's voice took on the sharp edge of a lawyer who'd just spotted a slam-dunk case. "Please tell me you have documentation of your deployment dates and that you never gave anyone permission to occupy the property." Marcus looked up at the house where his grandmother had taught him the value of hard work, where he'd built his first computer, where he'd dreamed of creating something meaningful, the house that his family thought they could simply take because they'd always seen him as weak. "I have everything documented, David. Everything." "Good. Don't engage with them directly yet. I'm sending you a secure file to upload photos of any changes to the property. We're going to need evidence of unauthorized occupation and potential destruction of property." "Marcus, yeah?" They picked the wrong veteran to mess with. As Marcus ended the call and began photographing the changed locks, the new furniture visible through windows, and the children's toys scattered across what should have been his front yard, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his first successful military operation: the satisfaction of watching a carefully laid plan begin to unfold. His family was about to learn that the quiet, accommodating Marcus they'd always pushed around no longer existed. In his place stood a combat veteran who owned a multi-million-dollar company and understood exactly how to use both the legal system and corporate leverage to protect what was his. The war for 12437 Maple Grove Drive was about to begin, and Marcus Rodriguez had every intention of winning it. 20 minutes after his call with David Chen, Marcus watched a silver Honda Odyssey pull into the driveway of his house. His sister Jessica stepped out, looking exactly like the irresponsible person he remembered, but now with the added weight of someone who'd been living off others for too long. At 31, Jessica had the permanently exhausted look of a single mother, but also the entitled confidence of someone who believed the world owed her something. 3 children tumbled out of the minivan, ages roughly 5, 8, and 10 based on Marcus's assessment. They immediately ran toward the backyard, shouting and leaving a trail of backpacks and juice boxes in their wake. Jessica didn't bother cleaning up after them, instead checking her phone as she walked toward the front door of Marcus's house. But it was the man who emerged from the passenger seat that really caught Marcus's attention: Danny Sullivan. Jessica's boyfriend of the month, based on her historical pattern, was a large, aggressive-looking guy in his early 30s, with the kind of swagger that suggested he was used to intimidating people to get his way. He wore a tank top that showed off prison tattoos and carried himself like someone who'd never been challenged by anyone who could actually fight back. Marcus watched from his position behind Mrs. Patterson's garden shed as Danny surveyed the property with the proprietary air of someone who considered it his territory. The man picked up one of the children's toys from the front yard and threw it carelessly toward the porch, where it bounced off the railing Marcus's grandmother had hand-carved 60 years ago. "Jess, remind me again why we gotta deal with this soldier boy coming back," Danny called out, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet neighborhood. "I thought your parents said he was staying overseas permanently." Jessica looked around nervously before responding. "Keep your voice down, Danny, and it doesn't matter what Marcus wants. Mom and Dad already signed the papers transferring ownership to me. He can't do anything about it now." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Papers transferring ownership. His parents had committed fraud, forging documents to steal his property. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was criminal activity that could result in federal charges. Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording video, making sure to capture Danny's face, the license plate of the Honda Odyssey, and Jessica's statements about ownership papers. His military intelligence training had taught him the value of evidence, and everything these people said was potentially useful in court. From his concealed position, Marcus could observe without being seen. Danny was clearly the muscle in this operation, the kind of guy Jessica had probably recruited to handle any problems that arose from her property theft. He was big, aggressive, and used to people backing down when he postured. Jessica, meanwhile, showed all the signs of someone who'd convinced herself that her lies were actually true. She genuinely seemed to believe she had a right to the house. The children were another factor Marcus had to consider. Whatever his sister had done, those kids were innocent. His grandmother would have wanted him to handle this situation in a way that protected them, even while holding their mother accountable for her choices. Marcus watched Jessica unlock the front door, his front door, with a key that shouldn't exist. She disappeared inside, while Danny remained in the front yard, lighting a cigarette and deliberately flicking ash onto the lawn Marcus had carefully maintained before his deployment. Marcus decided it was time to make his presence known. He walked out from behind Mrs. Patterson's garden shed and approached his own property with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. Danny noticed him immediately, and Marcus could see the man's posture shift into aggressive mode. "Can I help you, buddy?" Danny called out, the words friendly but the tone unmistakably threatening. He positioned himself between Marcus and the front door, spreading his stance wide to appear more intimidating. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez," Marcus replied calmly, stopping about 10 feet away. "This is my house." Danny looked him up and down, taking in Marcus's travel clothes and military bearing. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Your house? That's funny, man. I've been living here for 6 months. This is Jessica's place now. Is that right?" Marcus kept his voice level, professional. "And you are?" "I'm Danny, Jessica's boyfriend, and I'm thinking you might be confused about whose house this is." Danny took a step forward, using his size to try to intimidate. At 6'2" and probably 250 pounds, he was used to being the biggest guy in any confrontation. Marcus, at 5'11" and 185 pounds of military conditioning, didn't step back. "No confusion here, Danny. I'm standing on my property, looking at my house, talking to someone who appears to be trespassing." The front door opened and Jessica emerged, clearly having heard voices. When she saw Marcus, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, fear, and finally settling on defensive anger. "Marcus, what are you doing here? Mom said you weren't coming back for another year." Her voice was high, strained, like someone caught in a lie. "Deployment ended early," Marcus replied simply. "Imagine my surprise to find strangers living in my house." Danny stepped closer to Marcus, now only about 5 feet away. "Look, soldier boy, I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play here, but Jessica's family owns this house. Her parents gave it to her fair and square. You got some kind of problem with that?" Jessica moved to stand beside Danny, drawing confidence from his presence. "Marcus, you need to understand something. Mom and Dad made the decision to transfer the house to me because I have children who need stability. You were never here anyway, always off playing army somewhere. The house was just sitting empty." "Playing army," Marcus repeated quietly, his tone not changing but something shifting in his eyes. Danny, emboldened by what he interpreted as Marcus backing down, took another step forward. "That's right. And now the house belongs to someone who actually appreciates it. So why don't you just turn around and find somewhere else to be?" Marcus could smell alcohol on Danny's breath, mixed with cigarettes and something that might have been marijuana. The man was operating with impaired judgment, which made him unpredictable, but also gave Marcus additional leverage if this situation escalated to involve law enforcement. "Jessica," Marcus said, ignoring Danny entirely, "I need to ask you a direct question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you have any legal documents that give you ownership of this property?" Jessica's eyes darted to Danny, then back to Marcus. "Of course I do. Mom and Dad handled all the paperwork. It's all completely legal." "What documents, specifically?" "I don't have to explain anything to you," Jessica snapped, her defensive anger growing stronger. "You abandoned this place, Marcus. You can't just show up and expect everything to be exactly like you left it." Danny cracked his knuckles, a sound that echoed off the houses in the quiet neighborhood. "I think this conversation is over, Army boy. Time for you to move along." Marcus looked at both of them, his sister, who'd always been selfish but had now crossed into criminal behavior, and her boyfriend, who was clearly used to using violence to solve problems. They had no idea what they were dealing with. They saw a tired soldier who'd just gotten off a plane, someone they could push around like the old Marcus they remembered. They had no idea about Sentinel Defense Solutions, about the legal framework protecting the property, about the federal contracts and business relationships that made Marcus far from helpless. Most importantly, they had no idea that the man standing in front of them had spent 3 tours learning how to handle people who thought intimidation was a substitute for intelligence. "One more time, Jessica," Marcus said quietly. "Show me the documents that give you ownership of this property." "Or what?" Danny growled, moving even closer. Marcus looked directly into Danny's eyes with the same calm expression he'd used when facing down insurgents in Kandahar. "Or I'll show you mine." Danny let out a harsh laugh that carried across the neighborhood. "Your documents? What are you gonna show me, soldier boy? Your discharge papers? This ain't the army and you ain't in charge here." He turned to Jessica with exaggerated amusement. "Can you believe this guy? Thinks he can just march up here and start making demands." Jessica crossed her arms, emboldened by Danny's presence and her own manufactured sense of righteousness. "Marcus, you need to face reality. You've been gone for almost 2 years total. Mom and Dad got tired of maintaining an empty house for someone who clearly didn't want it. I have 3 children who needed a stable home after my divorce. The decision made sense." "Made sense," Marcus repeated quietly, his tone still measured but something shifting in his posture. Mrs. Patterson had appeared on her front porch, clearly concerned about the raised voices. Other neighbors were beginning to take notice as well, curtains twitching, garage doors opening slightly. Danny, feeding off what he perceived as an audience, decided to make his dominance even clearer. "Look around, army boy. You see kids' toys in the yard? You see my car in the driveway? That's because this is our house now. Jessica's been making a real home here, not just letting it sit empty like some kind of monument." "A monument," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the same quiet tone his soldiers had learned to recognize as dangerous. "To my grandmother, who raised me in this house, who left it to me when she died." Jessica's face flushed red. "Grandma Elena was my grandmother too, and she would have wanted this house to be filled with family, with children, not sitting empty while you play soldier on the other side of the world." The insult about his service, the second one in 5 minutes, hit exactly the nerve Jessica had intended. But instead of the angry outburst she was expecting, Marcus simply pulled out his phone. "Danny, Jessica, I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. You're both claiming that my parents legally transferred ownership of this property to Jessica, is that right?" "That's exactly right," Jessica said defiantly. "And Danny, you're claiming you have the right to live here and to prevent me from entering my own property." Danny stepped even closer, now close enough that Marcus could count the gold teeth in his sneer. "I'm not claiming anything, boy. I'm telling you how it is. This is my girl's house, which makes it my house, and you ain't welcome here." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then did something that completely surprised both of them. He smiled. "I appreciate you both being so clear about your positions," Marcus said, his thumb moving across his phone screen. "Because I've been recording this entire conversation, and I want to make sure we have your claims on the record." Jessica's face went pale. "You've been what?" "Recording. Audio and video. Your statements about ownership. Danny's threats about preventing me from accessing the property. Everything." Marcus's smile grew wider as he watched their confidence begin to crack. "See, here's the thing about fraud cases. Intent matters, and you've both just provided excellent evidence of intent." Danny's aggressive posture faltered slightly. "Fraud? What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that no legal transfer of this property has ever taken place," Marcus said, his voice taking on a different quality, sharper, more authoritative. "I'm talking about the fact that my parents cannot transfer ownership of property they don't own." Jessica shook her head frantically. "That's not true. They inherited this house when Grandma Elena died. They had every right to—" "No, Jessica," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through her protestations like a blade. "They didn't inherit this house. I did. And more importantly, I transferred ownership to my company 3 years ago for tax and legal purposes." The color drained completely from Jessica's face. "Your company?" Danny, still trying to maintain his aggressive stance but clearly confused, stepped forward again. "I don't know what kind of bullshit you're trying to pull, but—" Marcus held up a hand, and something in the gesture made Danny stop mid-sentence. It was the kind of automatic authority that came from 3 tours of commanding soldiers in combat situations. "The property deed for 12 and Maple Grove Drive," Marcus continued in the same calm, professional tone, is registered to Sentinel Defense Solutions, LLC. That's my cybersecurity consulting firm. This house serves as our corporate headquarters and primary business address. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I'd very much like to see these documents your mother showed you. They're inside, in the filing cabinet, in my filing cabinet, in my house, which you've been illegally occupying for 6 months. Marcus's voice remained calm, but the words hit like hammer blows. Jessica, do you understand what you've just admitted to? You've confessed to squatting in a commercial property, tampering with business assets, and potentially interfering with federal contracts. Danny, finally sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond his ability to control with intimidation, tried a different approach. Look, man, maybe we can work something out. Jessica didn't know about any company stuff. She was just trying to provide for her kids. Oh, I'm absolutely going to work something out, Marcus replied. But not with you, Danny. See? According to my research, and yes, I've spent the last hour researching, you have an outstanding warrant in Jefferson County for failure to appear on a domestic violence charge. You also appear to be in violation of your parole by living in a residence that hasn't been approved by your parole officer. Danny's face went white. How do you know that? Because I run a cybersecurity firm that specializes in background investigations for federal contracts. Do you really think I wouldn't run a basic criminal background check on someone I found illegally occupying my property? Jessica grabbed Danny's arm. You said you didn't have any legal problems. I don't, Danny protested, but his voice cracked. That warrant thing is just a misunderstanding. Marcus pulled up another screen on his phone. According to the Jefferson County Sheriff's database, which I have legitimate access to through my security clearance, the warrant was issued 6 weeks ago. Danny Sullivan, born March 15, 1991, last known address, Marcus paused dramatically, 1247 Maple Grove Drive, Colorado Springs. The implications hit Jessica like a physical blow. You used this address for your parole registration? Danny's aggressive facade crumbled completely. Babe, I can explain. You made me an accessory, Jessica shrieked. You used my address, this address, for official documents without telling me you were wanted by the police. Marcus watched the chaos unfold with the satisfaction of a chess master who'd just announced checkmate in 3 moves. His family had always underestimated him, always seen him as the quiet one who would accept whatever they decided. They had no idea that 3 tours of duty had taught him to think strategically, to gather intelligence, and to use information as a weapon more effective than any physical force. But Jessica, desperate and cornered, decided to make one last attempt to maintain control. She turned on Marcus with all the venom of someone whose carefully constructed lies were collapsing around her. You know what, Marcus? Even if you're right about the legal stuff, you're still the same selfish bastard you always were. Her voice rose to a near shriek. You left this house empty for 2 years while my children were living in a 1-bedroom apartment. You cared more about your precious military career than your own family. She was building steam now, feeding off her own righteousness. Grandma Elena would be ashamed of you. She raised you to take care of family, and what did you do? You abandoned us. You abandoned this house. You abandoned everything she taught you. The mention of his grandmother, the woman who'd saved him from his dysfunctional parents, who'd taught him the value of hard work and integrity, struck deep. But instead of the angry reaction Jessica was hoping for, Marcus's expression grew even calmer. You want to talk about what Grandma Elena would think? Marcus asked quietly. Let's talk about that. He pulled up another file on his phone. Let's talk about how I've been paying $800 a month to Rocky Mountain Property Management to maintain this house in perfect condition. Let's talk about how I've been paying property taxes, insurance, and utilities to keep this place ready for my return. Jessica's face showed the first flicker of uncertainty. Let's talk about how I've been running a multi-million-dollar business from this address, employing 12 people, contributing to the local economy. Let's talk about the federal contracts I've been fulfilling, the cybersecurity work that actually protects this country you think I've been playing soldier in. Marcus's voice grew quieter, more dangerous. Or let's talk about how you've been living rent-free in a property that generates enough revenue to support multiple families, while telling everyone that I abandoned it. Danny, finally realizing he was completely out of his depth, started backing toward the Honda Odyssey. Jess, maybe we should know, Jessica screamed, her desperation making her reckless. I don't care about his business or his money or any of it. This house should have been mine. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who took care of Mom and Dad while he was off playing hero. The word hero dripped with such sarcasm that Mrs. Patterson, still watching from her porch, actually gasped audibly. Marcus looked at his sister, really looked at her, and saw the same entitled, irresponsible person she'd always been, but now with the added desperation of someone who'd built her entire life on a foundation of lies. "Jessica," he said quietly, "you just made a very serious mistake." Jessica, her face flushed with anger and desperation, wasn't finished. The word hero had opened a floodgate of resentment that had been building for years. "You want to know what I really think about your military service, Marcus? You want to know what we all think?" Danny tried to grab her arm, finally sensing that she was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Jess, maybe we should just—" But Jessica shook him off, her voice rising to a pitch that carried across the entire neighborhood. "I think you joined the army because you couldn't handle real life. I think you ran away overseas because you were too weak to deal with actual responsibilities. And I think you hide behind that uniform because it's the only thing that makes you feel important." The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Mrs. Patterson actually stepped back on her porch, her hand over her mouth in shock. Other neighbors who had been discreetly watching from windows came out openly now, drawn by the escalating confrontation. But Jessica wasn't done. The floodgates were open, and years of jealousy and resentment came pouring out. "You know what else? I'm glad you weren't here when Grandma Elena got sick, because you would have just made everything harder with your need to control everything. At least when she died, she didn't have to see what a disappointment you turned out to be." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children in the backyard seemed to sense that something terrible had just happened, their voices falling quiet. Danny looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Mrs. Patterson's face showed the horror of someone who'd just witnessed a family destroy itself in real time. Marcus stood perfectly still for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear him. "Thank you, Jessica. That was exactly what I needed." Marcus raised his phone, and for the first time Jessica noticed that the camera was still recording. Her face went white as she realized that her entire emotional breakdown had been captured on video. "See, Jessica, up until about 30 seconds ago, I was planning to handle this as a simple property dispute, file the necessary paperwork, have you evicted through proper legal channels, maybe pursue civil damages for the unauthorized occupation." Marcus's voice took on a different quality entirely, calm, professional, and absolutely lethal. "But what you just said changed everything." Danny finally found his voice. "Look, man, she's upset. She didn't mean—" "Oh, she meant every word," Marcus interrupted, his eyes never leaving Jessica's face. "And now she's going to learn exactly what kind of disappointment I really am." Marcus pressed a number on his phone and it rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Chen and Associates," David speaking. "David, it's Marcus. I need you to implement Protocol 7 immediately." "Protocol 7. Marcus, that's for hostile corporate takeovers and federal fraud cases. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I'm also going to need you to contact Special Agent Sarah Mitchell at the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Tell her I have evidence of fraud involving a government contractor's registered business address." Jessica's face went from white to green. "FBI? Marcus, what are you doing?" Marcus ignored her, continuing his conversation with his lawyer. "I'll also need you to contact the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. I have a wanted fugitive at my location who's been using my business address for official documents." Danny started backing toward the Honda Odyssey more urgently. "Jess, we need to go. Right now." "David, how long until you can have the documentation ready?" "Excellent. And the federal marshals?" "Perfect. I'll see you in 20 minutes." Marcus ended the call and looked at Jessica, who was now visibly shaking. "Jessica, let me explain what's about to happen to you. In approximately 15 minutes, federal marshals are going to arrive to secure this property as part of an ongoing investigation into fraud affecting a government contractor. That's me, by the way. Sentinel Defense Solutions holds contracts with the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and 3 major Fortune 500 companies." Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus held up a hand. "When those marshals arrive, they're going to find evidence that someone has been illegally occupying a property that serves as the headquarters for a company with active federal security clearances. They're going to find evidence that fraudulent documents were created to facilitate this occupation. And they're going to find evidence that the perpetrators have been using this address for official purposes like parole registration without authorization." Danny was now openly panicking. "Jess, I'm leaving. You can call me when this is over." "No, Danny," Marcus said calmly. "You're not leaving. Because in about 10 minutes, Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies are going to arrive with a warrant for your arrest. Leaving now would just add evading arrest to your charges." As if summoned by Marcus's words, the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, growing steadily louder. "You see, Jessica, while you've been playing house in my property, I've been building something real. Sentinel Defense Solutions generates over $8 million in annual revenue. We employ 12 people full-time and support dozens of contractors. We hold security clearances that took years to obtain and maintain." The sirens were getting closer now, and Marcus could see the first police car turning onto Maple Grove Drive. "But more importantly," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded soldiers in combat zones, "I've been serving my country in ways you couldn't even comprehend. While you were here feeling sorry for yourself and stealing from family, I was helping protect critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. I was training Afghan military units to defend themselves. I was preventing terrorist organizations from accessing sensitive information." 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, followed immediately by a black SUV with government plates. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the SUV. A woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd built her career taking down white-collar criminals. "And Jessica," Marcus said, watching his sister's face as federal agents approached the property, "I've been documenting everything. Every payment I made for property maintenance, every business transaction conducted from this address, every federal contract that lists this location as Sentinel Defense Solutions headquarters." Agent Mitchell approached the group, her badge clearly visible. "I'm Special Agent Mitchell, FBI. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for your call. I understand we have a situation involving fraudulent occupation of a federal contractor's registered business address." "That's correct, Agent Mitchell. I have extensive documentation, video evidence of the perpetrators admitting to their actions, and evidence of additional crimes including parole violations and the use of false addresses for official documents." Jessica finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. "Marcus, I didn't know about the business. I swear I didn't know." Marcus looked at his sister with the same expression he'd used when interrogating captured insurgents, calm, professional, and completely without mercy. "Jessica, 3 hours ago, I was planning to surprise my family with news about my successful homecoming and maybe even share some of the profits from my business. I was looking forward to having my sister and her children as part of my life." He paused as Jefferson County deputies approached Danny with handcuffs ready. "But then you told me I was a disappointment who was hiding behind my uniform. You said I was too weak for real responsibilities. You said my grandmother would be ashamed of me." Agent Mitchell had begun photographing the property and taking notes while deputies read Danny his rights. The neighborhood had filled with onlookers, all of them watching the Rodriguez family drama unfold like a real-life soap opera. "So let me tell you what's going to happen now," Marcus continued. "You're going to be charged with fraudulent occupation of federal contractor property, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potentially interfering with federal contracts. Danny is going to jail for his outstanding warrant, parole violations, and whatever other charges Agent Mitchell decides to pursue." Jessica was crying now, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "Marcus, please. I have children. They need their mother. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal my house and insult my service to this country," Marcus replied. "But don't worry, Jessica. I'm sure Mom and Dad will be happy to help you with the legal fees. After all, they're the ones who convinced you that forging ownership documents was a good idea." As Agent Mitchell approached with questions about the fraudulent paperwork, and as Danny was loaded into the back of a police car, Marcus pulled out his phone one more time. This call was to his parents. "Mom, it's Marcus. I'm home early." "Yes, I'm standing in front of my house right now. The one you gave to Jessica." "Oh, you want to explain? Perfect. Agent Mitchell from the FBI would love to hear your explanation too." Marcus looked at his sister, who was now being questioned by federal agents, and felt the satisfaction of a perfectly executed military operation. "You called me a disappointment, Jessica. But the only disappointment here is that it took me this long to realize that some family members aren't worth protecting." The quiet, accommodating Marcus Rodriguez that his family had always pushed around was gone forever. In his place stood a successful business owner, a decorated veteran, and someone who understood that respect isn't given, it's earned and sometimes demanded. The war for 1247 Maple Grove Drive was over, and Marcus had won complete. 3 hours later, Marcus stood in his grandmother's kitchen. His kitchen, watching FBI forensics specialist catalog evidence while Agent Mitchell completed her preliminary report. The house that had been violated by months of unauthorized occupation was finally being treated with the respect it deserved as the headquarters of a legitimate business operation. "Miss Rodriguez," Agent Mitchell said, approaching with a tablet full of documentation. "I have to say, this is one of the most thoroughly documented fraud cases I've seen in 15 years. Your business records, property documentation, and video evidence make this absolutely airtight." Marcus accepted the tablet, reviewing the preliminary charges being filed. "What are we looking at for Jessica and my parents? For your sister, we're filing charges of fraudulent occupation of federal contractor property, conspiracy to commit fraud, and interference with government contracts. The fact that she admitted on camera to believing she owned the property actually helps establish intent." Agent Mitchell pulled up another screen. "For your parents, we're looking at forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potentially mail fraud if they used postal services to facilitate any of the document creation. And Danny? Mr. Sullivan is looking at a minimum of 18 months for the outstanding warrant, plus additional time for parole violations. The fact that he used your business address for official documents without authorization adds federal charges to his state problems." Marcus nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. "And the children?" Agent Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "Colorado Child Protective Services is already involved. Given that your sister will likely be facing federal charges, they'll need to determine appropriate placement. Do you have any family members who might be suitable guardians? My Aunt Maria on my mother's side. She's always been the responsible one in the family. I can provide her contact information." "That would be helpful. The goal is always to keep children with family when possible." As Agent Mitchell continued her documentation, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed his parents' home number. He almost smiled as he answered. "Hello, Mom. Marcus." His mother's voice was high-pitched with panic. "What have you done? The FBI is at our house. They're taking our computers and asking about property transfers." "I didn't do anything, Mom. You and Dad did this when you decided to forge documents and steal my house." "We didn't steal anything. We gave it to Jessica because she needed it more than you did." Marcus walked to the window overlooking the front yard, where neighbors were still gathered, watching federal agents work. "Mom, let me ask you something. Did you ever actually check who owns this house?" There was a long pause. "Of course we did. It was Elena's house, then it became yours, and then we transferred it to Jessica. But you never actually looked at the deed, did you? You never checked with the county records office. You just assumed." Another pause, longer this time. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I transferred ownership of this house to my company 3 years ago. I'm talking about the fact that you cannot legally transfer property you don't own. I'm talking about the fact that you committed federal fraud because this house serves as the headquarters for a company with government contracts." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. "Mom, are you still there? Your company?" His mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Sentinel Defense Solutions. 8 million in annual revenue. 12 full-time employees. Contracts with the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. The company I built while you were busy telling everyone I was just playing soldier overseas." Mrs. Patterson knocked on the front door as Marcus was ending the call with his mother. Agent Mitchell nodded for him to answer it. "Marcus, honey," the elderly woman said, wringing her hands nervously. "I am so sorry. If I had known what Jessica was doing was illegal, I would have called you immediately." "Mrs. Patterson, you have nothing to apologize for. You told me the truth when I asked, and that's more than my own family did." "Is it true what that FBI agent said? About you owning a big company?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed all day. "It's true. Grandma Elena always said that education and hard work would take me places. I guess she was right." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. "She would be so proud of you, Marcus. Not just for the business, but for how you handled this whole situation. You could have come in here angry and violent, but you did everything the right way." As if summoned by her words, other neighbors began approaching. Marcus found himself surrounded by people he'd known since childhood, all expressing support and amazement at how the situation had unfolded. "Marcus," said Tom Hendricks from 2 houses down, "my son is graduating college next year with a computer science degree. If your company ever needs entry-level talent..." Mr. Rodriguez called out Maria Santos, the neighborhood's unofficial organizer. "We want you to know that none of us believed Jessica when she said you'd abandon the house. We all knew something wasn't right." The validation felt good, but what felt better was the realization that his grandmother's neighborhood, his neighborhood, was still filled with decent people who understood right from wrong. Agent Mitchell approached with an update as the neighbors dispersed. "Your sister has been released on bond, but she's not allowed to return to this property. Your parents are being questioned at the federal building downtown." "What about the forged documents? We found them in your sister's possession, along with email correspondence between her and your parents planning the transfer. It's all admissible evidence." Agent Mitchell checked her notes. "Your sister seems to genuinely believe that your parents had the legal right to give her the house. She's claiming she was misled. And my parents, they're taking a different approach. They're claiming they believed they were acting in your best interests, managing property for an absent family member." Marcus shook his head. "Even now, they're lying. The evidence doesn't support their version of events. The email correspondence shows clear intent to deceive, and your sister's video confession establishes that they knew you hadn't consented to any transfer." Agent Mitchell's phone buzzed, and she checked the message. "Your parents have just been formally charged. They're being released on bond with conditions. No contact with you, no approach of this property, and surrender of their passports." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice was being served, sadness that it had come to this, and a strange sense of closure. His family had forced him to choose between enabling their destructive behavior and protecting what he'd built. For the first time in his life, he'd chosen himself. David Chen arrived as the FBI was finishing their on-site investigation, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and wearing the satisfied expression of a lawyer who'd just won a major victory. "Marcus, my friend," David said, embracing him, "I have to say, when you told me about Protocol 7, I thought you might be overreacting, but after seeing the evidence," he whistled low, "this is going to be a landmark case for protecting business property rights." "What's the likely outcome? For your family? Significant jail time, restitution, and permanent criminal records. For you? Complete vindication, possible civil damages in the 7-figure range, and a case study that will be taught in law schools for decades." David pulled out a folder. "I've also been fielding calls all afternoon. Word has spread in the cybersecurity community about what happened. You've got 3 new contract offers, 2 acquisition inquiries, and a request from the Department of Defense to expand your current contract scope." Marcus accepted the folder, amazed at how quickly news traveled in his industry. "Acquisition inquiries? 2 Fortune 100 companies want to discuss purchasing Sentinel Defense Solutions. The preliminary numbers start at $50 million. The magnitude of what had happened was starting to sink in. His family's attempt to steal his house had inadvertently showcased his business success to the exact people who could help him expand it exponentially. "There's one more thing," David said, pulling out a final document. "The Colorado Springs Business Council wants to present you with their Veteran Entrepreneur of the Year award. Apparently your story has already made it to the local news." As evening approached and the last of the federal agents departed, Marcus found himself alone in his house for the first time in 18 months. The silence was profound. No children shouting, no strangers walking through his grandmother's rooms, just the peaceful quiet of a home reclaimed. He walked through each room, noting the damage that would need to be repaired and the belongings that would need to be replaced. But more than that, he was making note of the improvements he wanted to make. Sentinel Defense Solutions was growing rapidly, and he would need proper office space. The basement could be converted into a secure server room. The guest bedroom could become a conference room for client meetings. Marcus pulled out his laptop and began drafting an email to his employees, informing them that their temporary remote work arrangement was ending and that they would soon have a proper corporate headquarters. As he typed, he thought about his grandmother, Elena, who had always believed that hard work and integrity would prevail over shortcuts and deception. She had been right. His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Local news wants an interview. How do you want to handle this?" Marcus considered the question. His family had spent years telling people he was irresponsible, unreliable, and undeserving of respect. Maybe it was time to set the record straight. He typed back, "Schedule it. It's time people knew the truth." As he hit send, Marcus realized that the quiet, accommodating person his family had always taken advantage of was truly gone. In his place was someone who understood his own worth, who had built something meaningful, and who would never again allow others to define his value. The house at 12047 Maple Grove Drive was finally home again, and Marcus Rodriguez was finally the man his grandmother had always known he could become. Outside, Mrs. Patterson turned on her porch light, the same signal she'd used for decades to let the neighborhood know that all was well. For the first time in months, it really was. The Colorado Springs Business Journal headline read, "Local Veterans Cybersecurity Firm Acquired for $85 million." Below it, a photo showed Marcus Rodriguez shaking hands with the CEO of Tech Secure Industries, with 12047 Maple Grove Drive visible in the background, now sporting a discreet but professional sign reading, Sentinel Defense Solutions Corporate Headquarters. Marcus set down the newspaper and looked around the conference room he'd built in what used to be his grandmother's guest bedroom. 12 employees now worked full-time from the Victorian house that his family had tried to steal, and the secure server room in the basement hummed quietly with equipment protecting some of the nation's most sensitive digital infrastructure. The acquisition hadn't been his original plan, but the publicity from the property theft case had attracted attention from major players in the cybersecurity industry. TechSecure's offer had been too good to refuse: $85 million up front, retention of all his employees at increased salaries, and Marcus staying on as chief security officer with complete autonomy over his division. More importantly, the deal had included a provision that Sentinel Defense Solutions would maintain its headquarters at 1247 Maple Grove Drive indefinitely. His grandmother's house would remain the heart of everything he'd built. A knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, he could see a familiar figure standing nervously on the porch. His sister Jessica, looking thinner and older than she had 6 months ago. Marcus opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Jessica, Marcus, I know I don't have any right to be here, but I needed to talk to you." She was dressed simply, wearing the kind of practical clothes that suggested someone who was working for a living rather than living off others. Her 3 children were visible in the car parked at the curb, waiting quietly. "Talk," Marcus said simply. "I wanted to apologize, and I wanted to thank you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Thank me?" Jessica took a shaky breath. "For what you did with Aunt Maria. For making sure my kids had somewhere safe to go when I couldn't take care of them anymore." The custody arrangement had been one of the few bright spots in the entire situation. Marcus had not only provided Aunt Maria's contact information to Child Protective Services, but had also quietly established trust funds for each of Jessica's children. Funds that would pay for their education and support but couldn't be accessed by their mother. "The kids deserved stability," Marcus replied. "They didn't choose any of this." "I know, and I know I don't deserve your help, but," Jessica's voice cracked. "The mandatory counseling, the community service, the job at the grocery store, it's been hard, but it's also been the first time in my adult life that I've had to actually take responsibility for myself." Marcus studied his sister's face. The entitlement was gone, replaced by something he'd never seen there before: genuine humility. "What do you want, Jessica?" "I want to earn the right to see my kids again. I want to prove that I can be the mother they deserve, and someday, maybe, I want to earn the right to be your sister again." The federal charges had ultimately resulted in Jessica serving 4 months in minimum security prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. She was working at a local grocery store, living in a small apartment, and attending court-mandated financial responsibility classes. The woman standing on his porch bore little resemblance to the entitled person who'd tried to steal his house. "Actions, not words," Marcus said finally. "If you want to rebuild your life, do it. If you want to be a better mother, prove it. If you want to earn forgiveness, earn it." Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will. I promise I will." As she walked back to her car, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected: a small measure of hope for his sister's future. His parents' story had taken a very different trajectory. Robert and Linda Rodriguez had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy charges. They'd lost their house to pay legal fees and restitution, and Linda's part-time job at the bank had been terminated due to her felony conviction. But more than the legal consequences, they'd faced complete social ostracism. The story of their attempt to steal their son's house while he was deployed had become local legend, and not in a way that garnered sympathy. Church friends, neighbors, and extended family had all distanced themselves from people who would betray their own son's military service. Marcus had received a single letter from his father during the prison sentence, a rambling, self-pitying missive that blamed everyone except himself for the family's situation. Marcus had read it once and thrown it away. Some people learned from their mistakes, others simply found new people to blame. His parents would be released in 6 months, but they would emerge into a world where their reputation was permanently destroyed and their relationship with their son was irreparable. Marcus had made peace with that reality. Danny Sullivan's story served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of choosing intimidation over intelligence. The outstanding warrant had been just the beginning of his legal troubles. The parole violations combined with new charges related to the property fraud had resulted in a 4-year sentence. But perhaps more significantly, the viral video of Danny trying to intimidate a decorated veteran had destroyed any credibility he might have had in his social circles. Even other criminals had standards, and threatening a soldier's family home while he was deployed overseas violated those standards completely. Marcus had heard through law enforcement contacts that Danny's time in prison had been particularly difficult, as word of his actions had preceded him into the correctional system. Veterans were respected in prison culture, and those who disrespected veterans faced consequences that the legal system couldn't provide. The property theft case had inadvertently sparked a renaissance in the Maple Grove neighborhood. The story of Marcus's success, combined with the professional upgrading of his house into a corporate headquarters, had attracted other young professionals to the area. Property values had increased by 30%, but more importantly, the community had developed a new sense of pride and security. Mrs. Patterson often joked that having an FBI-approved cybersecurity firm as a neighbor made everyone feel safer. The house itself had been carefully restored and upgraded while maintaining its Victorian character. Marcus had hired local craftsmen to repair the damage caused by Jessica's occupation, and he'd added discreet security features that reflected his profession. The result was a perfect blend of historical charm and modern functionality. The local news interview Marcus had given 6 months earlier had evolved into something much larger. Business journals had picked up the story as an example of veteran entrepreneurship success. Military publications had featured it as a story about transition challenges and triumphs. Even national news outlets had covered it as an example of how military skills translated into civilian business success. Marcus had used the media attention strategically, always focusing on the business aspects rather than the family drama. He'd become a sought-after speaker at veteran entrepreneurship conferences and cybersecurity industry events. The exposure had brought Sentinel Defense Solutions to the attention of major corporations and government agencies, ultimately leading to the acquisition that had made Marcus financially independent for life. Perhaps the most satisfying long-term consequence of the entire situation was the trust funds Marcus had established for Jessica's children. Each child would receive full college tuition funding, followed by a substantial inheritance when they turned 25. The funds came with conditions. The children had to maintain good grades, avoid criminal activity, and demonstrate basic financial responsibility. Most importantly, they had to write annual letters to their Uncle Marcus, updating him on their lives and goals. The oldest child, Emma, had already begun corresponding with Marcus. Her letters revealed a bright, thoughtful girl who was thriving under Aunt Maria's care and who understood that her mother's mistakes had actually opened doors to better opportunities. Marcus had also established a scholarship fund at his grandmother's old church, providing college assistance to local military families. Elena Rodriguez Memorial Scholarships would ensure that other young people could follow the path of education and service that his grandmother had encouraged. As Marcus prepared for another day of running his cybersecurity division from his grandmother's house, he reflected on how completely the situation had transformed. His family's attempt to steal his property had ultimately resulted in Runner, national recognition for his business success, an $85 million acquisition that secured his financial future, restoration and improvement of his grandmother's house, trust funds ensuring his nieces and nephews would have opportunities his sister never provided, his parents facing complete social and financial ruin, Danny Sullivan facing years in prison, Jessica finally being forced to take responsibility for her life. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had learned to value himself appropriately. He would never again allow others to take advantage of his kindness or mistake his restraint for weakness. The quiet, accommodating Marcus Rodriguez, who had always cleaned up his family's messes, was gone forever. In his place stood a successful business leader who understood that sometimes the greatest kindness you can show destructive people is refusing to enable their behavior. As he opened his laptop to begin another day of protecting America's digital infrastructure from his grandmother's dining room, Marcus smiled. Elena Rodriguez had always said that hard work and integrity would triumph over shortcuts and deception. Once again, Grandma had been absolutely right. The house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive stood as a monument to that truth. A Victorian home where 3 generations of Rodriguez family members had learned the difference between earning success and stealing it, and where one veteran had proven that the best revenge is simply becoming the person your enemies never expected you to be. The invitation arrived on official Department of Defense letterhead, addressed to Marcus Rodriguez, CEO, Sentinel Defense Solutions Division, Tech Secure Industries. The Pentagon was requesting his presence at a cybersecurity summit, where he would be presenting on military-to-civilian technology transfer, a case study in veteran entrepreneurship. Marcus set the invitation on his desk, the same antique oak desk his grandmother had used to pay her bills and write letters to family. Now it served as the command center for a cybersecurity operation that protected critical infrastructure across 3 continents. The irony wasn't lost on him. 2 years ago, his family had dismissed him as someone playing soldier who was too weak for real responsibilities. Now the Department of Defense was asking him to teach other military leaders how to transition their skills into civilian success. His phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Congratulations on the Pentagon invitation. Also, the documentary crew wants to know if they can film the presentation for the final segment." The documentary? Marcus had initially resisted the idea when Netflix had approached him about featuring his story in their series on veteran entrepreneurship. But David had convinced him that sharing his experience could help other veterans navigate their own transitions while also serving as a powerful deterrent to those who might consider taking advantage of deployed service members. Family Betrayal to Fortune 500, the Marcus Rodriguez story, was scheduled to premiere in 3 months. The trailer had already garnered over 5 million views, with comments ranging from outrage at his family's behavior to inspiration from his business success. The documentary had already begun generating unexpected consequences. Marcus had received hundreds of emails from veterans sharing their own stories of family betrayal, business success, and transition challenges. Many had thanked him for proving that military skills translated directly into civilian leadership capabilities. But perhaps more significantly, he'd received dozens of reports from military legal assistance offices about family members attempting similar property thefts while service members were deployed. His case had become a cautionary tale that was actively preventing other families from making the same mistakes his parents had made. The Pentagon had even incorporated lessons from his case into their pre-deployment legal briefings, ensuring that service members understood the importance of protecting their assets through proper legal structures. Marcus pulled up the latest email from his niece Emma, now 14 and thriving under Aunt Maria's care. Her grades were excellent, she was active in student government, and her letter revealed a maturity that far exceeded her years. "Uncle Marcus," she'd written, "I know you probably don't want to hear about Mom, but I thought you should know that she's been working really hard to become a better person. She got promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store, and she's taking night classes to become a medical assistant. She asks about you sometimes, but she doesn't expect anything. She says she's just grateful that you made sure we were okay when she couldn't." The middle child, Marcus Jr., named after his uncle before the family drama, was excelling in mathematics and had expressed interest in computer programming. His latest school project had been a presentation on cybersecurity, clearly influenced by his uncle's career. The youngest, Sophia, was only 8 but already showing signs of the family intelligence. Aunt Maria reported that she was reading at a high school level and had asked if she could visit Uncle Marcus's computer house someday. Marcus had quietly arranged for all 3 children to attend summer technology camps, exposing them to the same kind of STEM education that had launched his own career. Unlike his sister, they would have every opportunity to build legitimate success. His parents' post-prison experience had been even worse than Marcus had predicted. Robert Rodriguez had found work as a night security guard at a warehouse, earning minimum wage at age 58. Linda had been unable to find employment that would hire someone with a felony fraud conviction. They'd been forced to rent a small apartment in the least desirable part of Colorado Springs, relying on social services to supplement their income. The people who had once bragged about giving away their son's house now struggled to pay their own rent. But more devastating than their financial situation was their complete social isolation. Their church had asked them to find another congregation. Former friends crossed the street to avoid conversation. Even their extended family had distanced themselves, embarrassed by the national attention their fraud case had received. Marcus had heard through mutual acquaintances that his father spent most evenings drinking alone, ranting about how ungrateful his son was, and how the military had brainwashed Marcus into turning against family. The man remained incapable of accepting responsibility for his own choices. His mother had attempted to reach out twice, once through Aunt Maria and once through a letter sent to his business address. Both times she'd asked for understanding and suggested that family should forgive family. Neither message had acknowledged any wrongdoing or expressed genuine remorse. Marcus had not responded to either attempt. Some people learned from consequences, others simply resented them. His parents clearly fell into the latter category. Danny Sullivan's prison experience had reportedly been as difficult as expected. The viral video of him threatening a deployed veteran's property had followed him into the correctional system, where veteran service was respected even among criminals. Marcus had received an update from law enforcement contacts that Danny had been transferred between facilities 3 times due to interpersonal conflicts, prison code for the fact that other inmates had made his life unbearable. With 18 months remaining on his sentence, Danny had reportedly found religion and was claiming to be a changed man. He'd written several letters to Marcus expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness. Marcus had read the first letter and recognized the same manipulative patterns Danny had used when living in his house. The man wasn't sorry for his actions, he was sorry for the consequences. The remaining letters had gone directly into the trash, unopened. The transformation of Maple Grove Drive had exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus's success story, combined with the professional upgrading of his house, had attracted other young professionals and entrepreneurs to the neighborhood. 3 houses had been purchased by tech workers who appreciated having a cybersecurity expert as a neighbor. 2 military families had moved in, drawn by the area's veteran-friendly reputation. Property values had increased 45% since the documentary announcement. Mrs. Patterson, now 78, had become something of a local celebrity as the witness to the Rodriguez case. She gave regular interviews to journalism students and had been featured in several articles about the importance of neighborhood vigilance. The elderly woman had also become Marcus's unofficial business advisor, often joining him for coffee and offering surprisingly astute observations about corporate strategy. Her life experience and practical wisdom had proven invaluable during several major business decisions. Marcus's calendar was now packed with speaking engagements at military bases, veteran organizations, and business conferences. His standard presentation, From Combat to Corporate, translating military leadership into business success, had become one of the most requested talks in the veteran entrepreneurship space. But the most meaningful speeches were the ones he gave at military family readiness groups, teaching spouses and family members about legal protections for deployed service members. These presentations had directly prevented dozens of similar property theft situations. The feedback from these talks was consistently powerful. Military families appreciated learning from someone who had faced the worst-case scenario and emerged stronger. Young veterans found hope in seeing that military skills were valuable in the civilian world. Corporate audiences were equally engaged, recognizing that Marcus represented the kind of disciplined, strategic thinking they wanted in their leadership teams. Using a portion of his acquisition windfall, Marcus had established the Elena Rodriguez Foundation for Veteran Entrepreneurship. The foundation provided startup capital, mentorship, and legal protection services for veterans launching their own businesses. The foundation's flagship program offered comprehensive legal consultations to help veterans protect their assets before deployment. Every participant received the kind of corporate structure advice that had saved Marcus's property and enabled his business success. In just 18 months, the foundation had helped launch 47 veteran-owned businesses and had prevented 12 documented cases of family property theft through proper legal planning. As Marcus prepared for his Pentagon presentation, he reflected on the complete transformation his life had undergone. The quiet, accommodating family member who had always cleaned up others' messes had evolved into a nationally recognized business leader whose story inspired thousands of veterans. His grandmother's house had become the headquarters for a division of a Fortune 500 company. His business acumen was being studied by military leadership schools. His legal case was being taught in law schools as an example of perfect asset protection strategy. But perhaps most satisfying was the knowledge that his success was built on exactly the values his grandmother had taught him: hard work, integrity, education, and service to others. He hadn't won through deception or shortcuts. He'd won by becoming the person she'd always known he could be. The family members who had tried to steal his foundation had inadvertently provided him with the motivation to build something far greater than they'd ever imagined possible. As he reviewed his Pentagon presentation notes, Marcus smiled at his grandmother's photo on the desk. Elena Rodriguez had raised a boy who believed in justice, hard work, and family loyalty, but she'd also raised a man who understood that family loyalty had to go both ways. The house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive stood as a monument to that truth, a place where one veteran had learned the difference between enabling destructive behavior and building something worthy of protection, and where the best revenge had indeed proven to be simply becoming the person his enemies never expected him to be. The Netflix documentary Family Betrayal to Fortune 500, the Marcus Rodriguez story, had been viewed over 50 million times worldwide, making it one of the most watched episodes in the platform's business documentary series. But its impact extended far beyond entertainment value. It had fundamentally changed how military families approached asset protection and how society viewed veteran entrepreneurship. Marcus stood in the green room at the White House, adjusting his tie before the Medal of Freedom ceremony. President Hayes had personally selected him for the civilian honor, citing his extraordinary contributions to national cybersecurity and veteran entrepreneurship, as well as his role in protecting military families from financial exploitation. The irony of receiving the nation's highest civilian honor in recognition of work that began because his own family had tried to steal his house was not lost on him. Sometimes the universe had a sense of humor. "Mr. Rodriguez?" A White House aide appeared at the door. "They're ready for you in the Oval Office for the pre-ceremony photos." As Marcus walked through the corridors of power, he thought about the phone call he'd received that morning from his niece Emma, now 18 and preparing to start her freshman year at MIT on a full academic scholarship. "Uncle Marcus," she'd said, her voice thick with emotion, "I just wanted you to know that watching you receive the Medal of Freedom today is going to be the proudest moment of my life, not because of the award, but because you showed me what it means to turn pain into purpose." The East Room was filled with distinguished guests, military leaders, and business executives. Marcus spotted Mrs. Patterson in the third row, now 83 but still sharp as ever, wearing the navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. Aunt Maria sat beside her, dabbing her eyes with a tissue even before the ceremony began. President Hayes approached the podium and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor individuals whose extraordinary contributions have strengthened our nation and inspired countless others. Marcus Rodriguez represents the very best of American values: service, resilience, innovation, and the courage to transform personal adversity into public good." The president's words carried clearly through the room as he began recounting Marcus's story: the deployment, the property theft, the legal battle, and the business empire that emerged from the ashes of family betrayal. When Marcus Rodriguez discovered that his family had stolen his childhood home while he served our country overseas, he could have chosen bitterness, revenge, or retreat. Instead, he chose excellence. He transformed a personal violation into a national movement that has protected thousands of military families and created innovations that defend our digital infrastructure. Marcus felt the weight of the moment as the president continued. The Sentinel Defense Solutions division that Marcus built from his grandmother's dining room now protects critical infrastructure for 17 nations. The Elena Rodriguez Foundation has launched over 300 veteran-owned businesses and prevented more than 100 documented cases of family property theft through legal education and protection services. The applause was thunderous, but Marcus found himself thinking about his grandmother Elena, wishing she could have witnessed this moment. That evening, back in his hotel room, Marcus finally opened the folder Senator Williams had given him. The first letter was from a Navy family in San Diego. "Dear Mr. Rodriguez, we wanted you to know that your sister Jessica helped us recover our house after my husband's brother tried to sell it while we were deployed. Jessica understood exactly how the scam worked because she'd been part of one herself. Her help was the difference between losing everything and keeping our home. We know she can't undo what she did to your family, but she saved ours." The second letter was from an Army couple in Texas. "Jessica Rodriguez sat with us through 6 hours of depositions when we pressed charges against my wife's parents for forging property transfer documents. She knew every trick they'd used because she'd used them herself. Without her testimony about how these schemes work, we never would have won our case. There were 15 more letters, each describing how Jessica's expertise in property fraud gained from perpetrating it against her own brother had been turned into a weapon against others who would victimize military families. The final document in the folder was a handwritten letter on simple notebook paper. Marcus, I know I have no right to expect you to read this, but I need you to know something. Every family I help reminds me of what I did to you. Every case I work shows me how evil I was when I stole your house. I can't fix what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't go through what I put you through. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that the little brother who always tried to protect everyone is the reason I finally learned how to protect people too. Your example saved me, even after I tried to destroy you. Thank you for showing me what integrity looks like. Jessica Marcus stared at the letter for a long time before reaching for his phone. Jessica answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. Hello? It's Marcus. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Marcus, I read the letters, he interrupted. All of them. I wasn't trying to manipulate you into contact. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did now, really understand it. Marcus walked to the hotel window, looking out at the Washington Monument lit against the night sky. 17 families? 19 now. 2 more cases closed this week. Jessica's voice was steady, professional. Marcus, I need you to know something. I'm not doing this to earn your forgiveness. I'm doing it because it's right. Because you taught me what right looks like, even when I was too selfish to see it. The kids? They're incredible. Emma's at MIT, as you know. Marcus Jr. got into the computer science program at University of Colorado. He wants to follow in his uncle's footsteps. Sophia just turned 13, and she's already talking about cybersecurity careers. Marcus smiled despite himself. They're good kids. They're good kids because of you. The trust funds, the education opportunities, even the stability they had with Aunt Maria, all of it came from you protecting them when I couldn't protect myself. There was another long pause. Jessica, what you did was unforgivable. I know, but what you're doing now, Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. Grandma Elena always said that people could change if they wanted to badly enough. Do you think she would have been proud of what I'm doing now? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think she would have been proud that you finally learned the difference between taking from family and protecting family. Marcus, I don't expect anything from you, but if someday you wanted to meet for coffee, just to talk, I'd like that. Marcus thought about the medal in his jacket pocket, about the ceremony earlier that day, about the long journey from that gas station parking lot to the White House. Maybe, he said finally, someday. As Marcus ended the call, he realized that this conversation represented the final piece of his transformation. The angry, betrayed veteran who had discovered his stolen house 5 years ago would never have considered the possibility of redemption for his sister. But the man who had received the Medal of Freedom that day, the man who had built an empire on integrity and used his success to protect others, understood that true victory wasn't just about defeating your enemies. Sometimes it was about giving people the chance to stop being your enemies. His grandmother had raised him to believe in justice, but she'd also raised him to believe in redemption. Jessica had spent 3 years proving that redemption was possible, even for someone who had committed the ultimate family betrayal. The house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive had been the catalyst for everything: the theft that had revealed Marcus's strength, the legal battle that had showcased his business acumen, and the success story that had inspired a nation. But perhaps its greatest victory was this: it had taught both Rodriguez siblings the true meaning of family, that real family protects, builds up and sacrifices for each other, and that sometimes, the greatest protection you can offer someone is holding them accountable until they learn to hold themselves accountable. Marcus Rodriguez had received the nation's highest civilian honor that day. But the phone call with his sister had given him something even more valuable: the knowledge that his example had finally taught someone he loved the difference between right and wrong. The war for 1247 Maple Grove Drive was truly over, and everyone, even the former enemies, had won. Marcus Rodriguez stood before a packed auditorium at the United States Military Academy at West Point, delivering the commencement address to the graduating class of 2035. At 44, he commanded the room with the quiet authority that had made him one of the most respected voices in veteran entrepreneurship and national security. 10 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, A journalist asked me what I would tell my younger self if I could go back to that day when I discovered my family had stolen my childhood home. My answer then was that I would tell him to trust the process, that integrity and hard work would ultimately prevail. The cadets listened with rapt attention, knowing they were hearing from someone who had transformed personal betrayal into national service. Today, I want to share what I've learned in the decades since that interview. The most important lesson isn't about business success or legal victories, it's about the compound effect of choosing character over convenience, every single day, even when no one is watching. In the front row, Marcus spotted his niece Emma Rodriguez Chen, now Dr. Emma Rodriguez Chen, who had married David Chen's son after completing her dual PhD in cybersecurity and international relations at MIT. She sat next to her husband, holding their 1-year-old daughter Elena Rodriguez Chen, named after her great-great-grandmother. 3 rows back sat Marcus Jr., now 23 and a senior software engineer at Sentinel Defense Solutions, having earned his computer science degree summa cum laude. Next to him was Sophia, 21, who was completing her final year at the Air Force Academy and had already been selected for the elite cyber warfare program. The 3 children whose mother had once tried to steal their uncle's house had become exactly what their great-grandmother Elena would have hoped: educated, principled, and committed to serving something larger than themselves. Character, Marcus continued, isn't built in moments of crisis. It's built in the thousands of small decisions we make when we think those decisions don't matter. When my family betrayed me, they revealed their character. When I chose to respond with legal action rather than revenge, I revealed mine. But the real test of character came in the years that followed, how I used the success that emerged from that crisis. The Rodriguez Institute for Military Family Protection, housed in a gleaming new building on the campus of the University of Colorado, now employed over 200 people and had expanded its mission far beyond property theft prevention. The institute provided comprehensive legal services, financial education, business development support, and emergency assistance to military families worldwide. Its annual budget of $50 million came from a combination of corporate partnerships, government grants, and Marcus's personal endowment. But more importantly, its impact was measured in the thousands of military families who had avoided financial exploitation, started successful businesses, or recovered from various forms of family betrayal. The Institute's most successful program was the Family Integrity Protocol, a comprehensive pre-deployment legal and financial protection system that had been adopted by all branches of the military. Every service member now received mandatory training on asset protection, family communication, and warning signs of financial abuse. After his West Point address, Marcus was approached by a familiar figure he hadn't seen in 3 years. His sister Jessica, now 43, looked healthy and confident in a way he'd never seen during their childhood. She wore the professional attire of someone who had built a legitimate career, and her handshake was firm and steady. "That was an incredible speech," she said simply. "Grandma Elena would have been so proud." Jessica had continued her victim advocacy work, eventually founding her own nonprofit organization focused specifically on family financial abuse within military communities. The Jessica Rodriguez Foundation had recovered over $12 million in stolen assets for military families and had successfully prosecuted 89 cases of family property theft. "I have something for you," Jessica said, pulling out a worn envelope. "I've been carrying this for 5 years, waiting for the right moment." Inside was a letter in their grandmother's handwriting, dated just months before her death. "My dear grandchildren, if you are reading this, it means I am gone but not forgotten. Marcus, you have always been my steady one, my builder, my protector of family. Jessica, you have always been my wild one, my challenger, my reminder that family means fighting for each other, not against each other. I pray that you will learn to use your strengths to protect each other, rather than hurt each other. The house is just wood and stone. Family is forever. Choose love. Choose protection. Choose each other. All my love, Grandma Elena." Marcus read the letter twice, his eyes misting slightly. "Where did you find this?" "In her recipe box, tucked inside the card for her famous chocolate chip cookies. I found it when I was cleaning out her things after everything happened. I wanted to give it to you earlier, but I needed to become the person she believed I could be first." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. 2 siblings who had traveled very different paths to arrive at the same understanding of what family really meant. "Coffee?" Marcus asked. "I'd like that," Jessica replied. As they walked across the West Point campus, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The theft of his house had set in motion a chain of events that had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of thousands of military families. His parents, now in their 70s, lived quietly in a small retirement community in Arizona. They had never acknowledged their wrongdoing, but they had also never again attempted to contact their children. Some people learned from consequences, others simply lived with them. Danny Sullivan had been released from prison 4 years earlier and had disappeared into the kind of obscurity that suggested he had finally learned to avoid attention. Marcus occasionally received reports from law enforcement contacts that Danny was working construction in Nevada, keeping his head down and staying out of trouble. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't tried to steal the house?" Jessica asked as they found a quiet cafe near the campus. Marcus considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I remember something Grandma Elena used to say, 'God writes straight with crooked lines.' Your betrayal forced me to discover capabilities I never knew I had. It forced me to build something bigger than I ever would have built otherwise. And it forced me to discover what kind of person I really was," Jessica added quietly. "I didn't like what I found, but at least I found it while there was still time to change." Their conversation was interrupted by a video call from Sophia, who was calling from the Air Force Academy. "Uncle Marcus, I watched your speech online. It was amazing. I wanted you to know that my thesis project got approved. I'm designing cybersecurity protocols specifically for protecting military family assets during deployment." Marcus smiled at his youngest niece, seeing in her face the perfect blend of Elena's determination and the family intelligence that, when properly directed, could accomplish remarkable things. "What's your research focus?" "I'm studying cases where family members attempted financial exploitation and developing early warning systems to prevent it. Guess whose case is my primary case study?" Jessica laughed, a sound Marcus hadn't heard from her in decades. "I'm famous for all the wrong reasons. Actually," Sophia continued, "you're famous for all the right reasons now. The advocacy work you've done has prevented hundreds of families from going through what Uncle Marcus went through. You turned your worst mistake into your greatest contribution." As the video call ended, Marcus looked at his sister and saw something he'd never expected to see: genuine peace. Jessica had spent a decade earning redemption through service to others, transforming her understanding of family betrayal into protection for countless families. "I have a proposition for you," Marcus said suddenly. "What kind of proposition?" "The Rodriguez Institute is expanding into international operations. We're setting up programs to help military families in allied nations. I need someone who understands family financial abuse from every angle, someone who knows how these schemes work because they've been on both sides of them." Jessica's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the chance to turn your expertise into protection for military families worldwide. You'd be Director of Family Protection Services with a staff of 30 and a budget of $5 million. "Marcus, I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me protect families the way we should have protected each other." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Grandma Elena always said family meant protecting each other. She was right. It just took us a while to figure out what that really meant. As they shook hands on the partnership, Marcus realized that this moment represented the true victory in the war for 1247 Maple Grove Drive. Not the legal triumph, not the business success, not even the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The true victory was two siblings choosing to protect other families because they had finally learned what their grandmother had tried to teach them all along. Family means building each other up, not tearing each other down. The house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive had become the headquarters for a cybersecurity empire, but its greatest achievement was teaching the Rodriguez family the true meaning of home. Not a place you own, but a bond you protect. And in a world where military families faced countless challenges, the Rodriguez siblings had finally learned to face those challenges together, using their hard-earned wisdom to protect others from the mistakes that had nearly destroyed them. The legacy of Elena Rodriguez lived on, not in the Victorian house she had left behind, but in the family values she had instilled. Values that had survived betrayal, been tested by success, and ultimately triumphed through forgiveness and shared purpose. The war was over. The family had been rebuilt, and the mission to protect other families was just beginning. Marcus Rodriguez stood in the boardroom of TechSecure Industries headquarters in downtown Denver, staring at the legal documents spread across the mahogany table. At 49, he had achieved everything he'd dreamed of and more, but the papers in front of him represented a threat he'd never anticipated. "Explain this to me again," he said to his legal team, his voice carrying the controlled tension that his employees had learned to recognize as dangerous calm. David Chen, now the lead partner at Chen & Associates and Marcus's longtime friend, adjusted his glasses and pointed to the first document. 3 weeks ago, a class action lawsuit was filed against TechSecure Industries, specifically targeting the Sentinel Defense Solutions division. The plaintiffs are claiming that your acquisition deal was fraudulent and that you used your military connections to secure unfair competitive advantages. Marcus picked up the lawsuit, scanning the names of the plaintiffs. His blood ran cold as he recognized the lead attorney, Robert Martinez, his father's cousin who had always resented the family's military tradition. The man who had once called Marcus a government lapdog at a family reunion 15 years ago. "Who's funding this?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That's where it gets interesting," David replied, pulling up a financial document on his tablet. "The lawsuit is being bankrolled by Cromwell Defense Systems, your biggest competitor in the government contracting space. They've been losing contracts to Sentinel for 5 years running." Jessica, now Marcus's trusted director of family protection services, leaned forward from her seat across the table. "This isn't about money or competition. This is about destroying your reputation. Look at the specific claims they're making." Marcus read through the allegations, his anger building with each line. RIN, misuse of military contacts for personal gain, fraudulent veteran status claims to secure contracts, exploitation of sympathy from property theft case to gain unfair media attention, use of government resources for private business development. "They're trying to make it look like everything I built was based on corruption rather than competence," Marcus said quietly. "It gets worse," David continued. "They've managed to get Senator Patricia Williams to call for a congressional investigation into veteran-owned business contracting practices. She's using your case as the primary example." Marcus felt a familiar cold rage settling in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced 15 years ago when he'd discovered his house had been stolen. Once again, people who had contributed nothing were trying to destroy what he'd built through hard work and integrity. Within 48 hours, the story had exploded across business and military news outlets. Headlines screamed variations of veteran business empire built on fraud and military hero or corporate con man. The same media that had celebrated Marcus's success story now seemed eager to tear it down. The worst part was watching how the narrative was being twisted. His grandmother's house, the symbol of family values and earned success, was being portrayed as a cynical prop in a scheme to gain sympathy and government contracts. Marcus sat in his home office at 1247 Maple Grove Drive, the same room where he'd built his first $1 million contract, watching a cable news segment that made him sound like a criminal mastermind rather than a veteran who'd turned family betrayal into business success. Joining us now is Robert Martinez, the attorney representing the plaintiffs in this case, the news anchor announced. "Mr. Martinez, you're alleging that Marcus Rodriguez has been defrauding the government for over a decade. Can you explain these claims?" Marcus's cousin appeared on screen looking exactly like the bitter, unsuccessful lawyer he'd always been. "What we're seeing here is a pattern of exploitation that goes back to the very beginning of Mr. Rodriguez's business empire. He used a family property dispute, which may itself have been fabricated for sympathy, to gain media attention and government contracts that should have gone to more qualified companies." "Fabricated," Marcus said aloud to his empty office. "Fabricated." The news segment continued with talking heads debating whether military veterans received unfair advantages in government contracting, whether Marcus's success story was too good to be true, and whether the entire cybersecurity industry was corrupt. By the end of the week, Sentinel Defense Solutions had lost 2 major contracts pending the investigation, and Marcus's speaking engagements had been canceled until the allegations are resolved. That evening, Marcus's phone rang constantly. Emma called from Boston, where she was now a professor at MIT, expressing outrage at the attacks on her uncle. Marcus Jr. called from Sentinel's offices, reporting that employee morale was plummeting as news outlets camped outside the building. Sophia called from her Air Force base in Colorado Springs, where her commanding officer had asked pointed questions about her family connections, but it was Jessica's call that surprised him most. "Marcus, I've been watching the news coverage, and I need to tell you something important." "What is it?" "I know Robert Martinez. He contacted me 3 months ago, asking questions about the property theft case. He wanted me to say that the whole thing was staged, that we'd planned it together to generate sympathy for your business." Marcus felt his blood pressure rising. "What did you tell him?" I told him to go to hell. But Marcus, he's not done. He's been contacting people from our past, trying to find anyone who will say something negative about you. He's even talked to Danny Sullivan. Danny? I thought he'd disappeared. He had, but Martinez tracked him down in Nevada and offered him money to claim that the whole confrontation at the house was staged. Danny refused, which shocked me. Apparently, prison taught him some integrity after all. Marcus absorbed this information, feeling the familiar military planning mindset taking over. This wasn't just a legal attack, it was a coordinated campaign designed to destroy his reputation, his business, and his family's legacy. Jessica, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to document every interaction you've had with Martinez, every question he asked, every suggestion he made, and I need you to reach out to every family we've helped through the Rodriguez Institute. If this goes to trial, I want them to understand what's really at stake here. The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his executive team, legal advisors, and family members. The conference room at 147 Maple Grove Drive, the same house that had started everything, was packed with people who had spent years building something meaningful together. Here's what we're dealing with, Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in combat zones. This isn't just about money or contracts. This is about destroying the credibility of veteran-owned businesses and dismantling the protections we've built for military families. He pulled up a presentation that his team had prepared overnight. Cromwell Defense Systems has been losing market share to veteran-owned companies for 5 years. They've hired Robert Martinez not just to sue us, but to create a narrative that all veteran business success is somehow fraudulent or unfair. David Chen nodded grimly. If they succeed in making your case look like fraud, it undermines every veteran entrepreneur who's used their military experience to build legitimate businesses. So what do we do? Asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the Rodriguez Institute's director of research. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had built their careers on integrity and service. We do what we've always done. We tell the truth, we document everything, and we fight back with facts rather than accusations. He pulled up another slide showing their legal strategy. We're going to demand discovery on Cromwell's communications with Martinez. We're going to subpoena their financial records. And we're going to prove that this entire lawsuit is a coordinated attack on veteran entrepreneurs funded by a competitor who can't win contracts through merit. Jessica raised her hand. What about the families we've helped? The military community that supported us all these years? That's where you come in, Marcus replied. I want testimonials from every family we've protected, every veteran business we've helped launch, every service member who's benefited from our programs. Let's remind the world what we've actually accomplished. As the meeting broke up and people began executing their assigned tasks, Marcus found himself alone in his grandmother's old living room. The house that had been stolen from him 15 years ago, that had become the symbol of his success, was now under attack again, this time through character assassination rather than outright theft. He walked to the mantelpiece where his grandmother's photo sat next to his Medal of Freedom, his military commendations, and pictures of the families his institute had helped. Elena Rodriguez smiled back at him from a frame that had survived everything: the original theft, the legal battles, the business expansion, and now this new assault on everything they'd built. What would you do, Grandma? He asked the photo quietly. The answer came to him immediately, in her voice. Mijo, when people try to tear you down, it's because they can't build themselves up. Show them what real strength looks like. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar calm that came before major operations. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him, and it wouldn't be the last. But 15 years of building legitimate success had given him resources and allies that his enemies couldn't imagine. The war for 1247 Maple Grove Drive was starting again. But this time, Marcus Rodriguez wasn't fighting alone. He had an army of military families, veteran entrepreneurs, and principled business leaders who understood what was really at stake. And this time, he wasn't just fighting for his house or his business. He was fighting for the integrity of every veteran who had ever tried to turn their service into civilian success. The battle lines were drawn, and Marcus Rodriguez was ready for war. 6 weeks into the legal battle, Marcus sat in the secure conference room at Chen & Associates, surrounded by boxes of documents, digital evidence displays, and a team of forensic accountants who had been working around the clock. What they had discovered was more explosive than anyone had anticipated. David, tell me you have good news, Marcus said, looking up from a financial analysis that showed suspicious money transfers between Cromwell Defense Systems and Robert Martinez's law firm. David Chen smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from his lawyer in weeks. "Marcus, we don't just have good news, we have a smoking gun. Actually, we have several smoking guns." He pulled up a series of email exchanges on the main display screen. "During discovery, we found communications between Cromwell's CEO, James Blackwood, and your cousin Robert Martinez, dating back 8 months, long before any legitimate concerns about your business practices could have emerged." Marcus read the first email aloud. "Robert, we need to find a way to neutralize the Rodriguez competitive advantage. His veteran status and that sob story about family property theft have given him an unfair edge in government contracting. Can you find any legal vulnerabilities in his background?" "It gets better," David continued, scrolling to the next email. "James, I've been researching my cousin's business dealings. The property theft case was real, but we might be able to reframe it as a publicity stunt. If we can cast doubt on his motivations, we can undermine his credibility with federal contractors." Jessica, who had been quiet during most of the meeting, leaned forward. "They're not just attacking Marcus's business, they're trying to rewrite our family history to make it look like the house theft was fake. Which brings us to our next piece of evidence," David said, pulling up bank records. "We traced the funding for this lawsuit, and it's not just Cromwell. There are 3 other defense contractors involved, plus a lobbying firm that specializes in challenging minority and veteran-owned business preferences." Marcus studied the financial web displayed on the screen. "This is a coordinated industry attack on veteran entrepreneurs." "Exactly. And here's the part that's going to destroy them in court." David pulled up another document. "We found communications where they discuss fabricating evidence. Specifically, they talked about paying witnesses to claim that your initial property dispute was staged for publicity." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a frivolous lawsuit. It was a criminal conspiracy involving witness tampering, fraud, and potentially racketeering. Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Normally, he would have let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Mr. Rodriguez? This is Angela Thompson. I worked for Cromwell Defense Systems as a senior contract analyst." Marcus put the call on speaker so his legal team could hear. "What can I do for you, Ms. Thompson? I need to meet with you. There are things about this lawsuit that you need to know, things that could end this entire case." David Chen immediately leaned into the phone. "Thompson, this is David Chen, Mr. Rodriguez's attorney. Are you saying you have information about Cromwell's involvement in the current litigation?" "I'm saying I have recordings, documents, and first-hand knowledge of a conspiracy to destroy veteran-owned businesses, and I'm saying that what they're doing to Mr. Rodriguez is just the beginning." 2 hours later, Angela Thompson sat in the secure conference room, a flash drive in front of her containing what she described as industrial espionage masquerading as legitimate competition. "I've worked for Cromwell for 12 years, she began, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. "I started noticing the pattern about 2 years ago. Every time we lost a contract to a veteran-owned business, James Blackwood would order research into the competitor's background, looking for anything that could be used to challenge their legitimacy." She plugged in the flash drive, and audio files appeared on the screen. "This is from a board meeting 6 months ago." James Blackwood's voice filled the room. "The Rodriguez problem has gotten out of hand. His success story is inspiring other veterans to start their own companies, and we're losing market share. We need to make an example of him that will discourage other military types from thinking they can compete with established contractors." Another voice, which Angela identified as Cromwell's head of legal affairs, responded. "If we can prove that his initial success was built on sympathy rather than competence, we can undermine the entire veteran entrepreneur narrative. Plus, destroying his reputation will open up his contracts for rebidding." Marcus felt his anger building, but it was the cold, calculated anger of someone who had learned to channel rage into strategy. "Angela," Marcus said quietly, "what made you decide to come forward?" "My brother," she replied, tears forming in her eyes. "He's a Marine veteran who started a small security consulting firm 3 years ago. Last month, Cromwell tried to destroy his business using the same tactics they're using against you. They hired investigators to dig up dirt on his family, spread rumors about his service record, and filed complaints with federal agencies claiming he was unqualified for his contracts." She pulled up more files on her laptop. "They have a whole department dedicated to this. They call it competitive intelligence, but it's really corporate warfare against veteran entrepreneurs. They've targeted 17 companies in the last 3 years. David Chen was already taking notes. Are you willing to testify about all of this? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stop them. What they're doing is destroying people's lives and undermining legitimate businesses. Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Denver. 15 years ago, he'd been a single veteran fighting to reclaim his stolen house. Now he found himself as the primary target in a corporate war against an entire community of veteran entrepreneurs. David, I want you to contact the FBI's white-collar crime division. This isn't just a civil lawsuit anymore. This is criminal conspiracy. Already done, David replied. Agent Sarah Mitchell is flying in from Washington tomorrow. Marcus smiled grimly. Agent Mitchell had been the FBI investigator who had handled his family's property theft case 15 years ago. She'd since been promoted to head the Bureau's corporate fraud task force. As news of the conspiracy began to leak through veteran business networks, Marcus found himself at the center of a movement he'd never expected to lead. His phone rang constantly with calls from veteran entrepreneurs who had faced similar attacks, military leaders expressing support, and business organizations offering assistance. General Patricia Hayes, his former commanding officer who was now retired and serving on several corporate boards, called personally. Marcus, I want you to know that the entire military business community is watching this case. What Cromwell is doing isn't just an attack on you. It's an attack on the principle that military service creates valuable skills for civilian enterprise. General, I appreciate the support, but I don't want this to become about military versus civilian business. I want it to be about integrity versus corruption. That's exactly why you're the right person to fight this battle, she replied. You've never asked for special treatment because of your service. You've just asked to be judged on your merits. That's what makes this attack so particularly offensive. That evening, Marcus received an email that made him pause. It was from Danny Sullivan, the man who had tried to intimidate him in his own driveway 15 years ago. Mr. Rodriguez, I heard about the lawsuit against you. I want you to know that when that lawyer Martinez contacted me, offering money to lie about our encounter at your house, I told him exactly what I told my parole officer years ago. You gave me every chance to walk away, and I chose to escalate. What happened that day was my fault, not yours. If you need me to testify to that fact, I will. Some people never learn from their mistakes, but I did. You taught me that actions have consequences, and now it's time for Cromwell to learn the same lesson. Danny Sullivan. Marcus stared at the email for a long time. The man who had once threatened his family was now offering to defend his reputation. It was perhaps the clearest indication of how completely the situation had transformed over the years. Late that night, Marcus convened a strategy meeting at 12047 Maple Grove Drive. The same house that had been the center of his original family crisis was now serving as the headquarters for a much larger battle. Jessica presented her findings from outreach to military families. We have testimonials from over 300 families that the Rodriguez Institute has helped. More importantly, we have documentation showing that our programs have prevented exactly the kind of attacks Cromwell is now using. Sophia, who had taken leave from the Air Force to help with the family crisis, presented her analysis of the federal contracting process. Uncle Marcus, every contract Sentinel has won has been through competitive bidding with clear documented superiority in technical capability and cost-effectiveness. There's no evidence of favoritism or unfair advantage. Marcus Jr. had been analyzing the digital evidence. Dad, the electronic trail is overwhelming. They've been planning this attack for over a year, and they've left digital fingerprints everywhere. As Marcus looked around the room at his family, the same family that had once been torn apart by greed and betrayal, he felt a deep sense of pride. They had learned from their mistakes, grown stronger through adversity, and were now united in defending not just their own interests, but the principles that defined their grandmother's legacy. Tomorrow, Marcus announced, we go on the offensive. We're not just defending against false accusations, we're exposing a criminal conspiracy that threatens every veteran entrepreneur in America. The house at 12047 Maple Grove Drive had seen many battles, but this one would determine whether the values it represented, integrity, hard work, and earned success, would survive in an era of corporate warfare and manufactured scandals. Marcus Rodriguez was ready to find out. Late that night, Marcus convened a strategy meeting at 12047 Maple Grove Drive. The same house that had been the center of his original family crisis was now serving as the headquarters for a much larger battle. Jessica presented her findings from outreach to military families. We have testimonials from over 300 families that the Rodriguez Institute has helped. More importantly, we have documentation showing that our programs have prevented exactly the kind of attacks Cromwell is now using. Sophia, who had taken leave from the Air Force to help with the family crisis, presented her analysis of the federal contracting process. Uncle Marcus, every contract Sentinel has won has been through competitive bidding with clear documented superiority in technical capability and cost-effectiveness. There's no evidence of favoritism or unfair advantage. Marcus Jr. had been analyzing the digital evidence. Dad, the electronic trail is overwhelming. They've been planning this attack for over a year, and they've left digital fingerprints everywhere. As Marcus looked around the room at his family, the same family that had once been torn apart by greed and betrayal, he felt a deep sense of pride. They had learned from their mistakes, grown stronger through adversity, and were now united in defending not just their own interests but the principles that defined their grandmother's legacy. Tomorrow, Marcus announced, we go on the offensive. We're not just defending against false accusations, we're exposing a criminal conspiracy that threatens every veteran entrepreneur in America. The house at 12047 Maple Grove Drive had seen many battles, but this one would determine whether the values it represented, integrity, hard work, and earned success, would survive in an era of corporate warfare and manufactured scandals. Marcus Rodriguez was ready to find out. Agent Sarah Mitchell arrived at 12047 Maple Grove Drive with a team of federal investigators and digital forensics specialists. 15 years after she had first walked through these rooms investigating a simple property theft, she was back to uncover what had become one of the largest corporate conspiracy cases in recent federal history. Marcus, she said, shaking his hand in the same living room where they had first met, when I investigated your family's property theft case, I never imagined I'd be back here investigating a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy targeting veteran entrepreneurs. Neither did I, Marcus replied, but it seems like this house has a way of exposing people's true character. Agent Mitchell spread out organizational charts and financial documents across Marcus's grandmother's dining room table. What we've uncovered goes far beyond Cromwell Defense Systems. This is a coordinated effort involving 6 major defense contractors, 2 lobbying firms, and a network of private investigators who specialize in destroying business reputations. She pointed to a complex web of connections on the display. They call themselves the Defense Industry Stability Coalition, but their real purpose is eliminating competition from veteran-owned and minority-owned businesses. Over the past 3 years, they've orchestrated attacks on 47 companies, resulting in $200 million in lost contracts and 36 business closures. Jessica, who had been taking notes, looked up sharply. 36 businesses destroyed? Completely destroyed. Business owners bankrupted, reputations ruined, families displaced, and in every case, the contracts went to members of this coalition. Marcus felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest. They're not just attacking businesses, they're attacking families, veterans who served their country and were trying to build something legitimate. That afternoon, Angela Thompson appeared on 60 Minutes in an interview that would change everything. Sitting across from veteran journalist Scott Pelley, she methodically destroyed Cromwell's narrative while exposing the broader conspiracy. Mr. Blackwood told our board that veteran entrepreneurs were getting unfair advantages through sympathy for their service, she said, her voice steady and professional. But what he really meant was that they were winning contracts through superior performance, and he couldn't compete legitimately. The interview included recordings of Cromwell executives discussing their strategy to neutralize the veteran advantage and make examples of successful veteran business owners. The most damaging moment came when Pelley played a recording of James Blackwood saying, "These military types think their service entitles them to success in business. We need to remind them that the real world doesn't care about their medals and their sob stories." The public reaction was immediate and devastating for Cromwell. Within hours, veteran businesses was trending on social media, with thousands of people sharing stories of veteran entrepreneurs who had built legitimate, successful companies through hard work and expertise. Major corporations began publicly distancing themselves from Cromwell, and 3 government agencies announced reviews of existing contracts. Senator Patricia Williams, who had initially called for an investigation into Marcus's business practices, found herself in an extremely uncomfortable position when the conspiracy evidence became public. What had started as a political opportunity to appear tough on government contracting had become a national scandal that made her look like either a dupe or a co-conspirator. The Senate hearing, broadcast live on C-SPAN, began with Senator Williams attempting to control the narrative. This hearing was called to investigate potential irregularities in veteran business contracting, not to relitigate corporate disputes. But Marcus, testifying under oath with the full backing of the FBI investigation, systematically dismantled that position. "Senator Williams," Marcus said, looking directly at her across the hearing room, "with respect, this isn't about irregularities in veteran contracting. This is about a criminal conspiracy to eliminate competition through fraud, intimidation, and character assassination." He pulled out a thick folder of documents. "I have here evidence of 47 businesses that were targeted by this conspiracy. 47 veteran and minority-owned companies that were destroyed, not through market competition, but through coordinated criminal activity." Senator Williams shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Rodriguez, the committee is aware of these allegations, but—" "Senator," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat, "I need to ask you a direct question. Did anyone from Cromwell Defense Systems or their associated lobbying firms contact your office before you called for this investigation?" The hearing room fell silent. Senator Williams's face flushed red as she realized the trap she had walked into. The committee receives input from many sources when considering investigations." Marcus nodded. "I'll take that as a yes. Agent Mitchell, would you please tell the committee what your investigation found regarding Senator Williams's office?" Agent Mitchell, testifying via video link from FBI headquarters, was direct and devastating. "Our investigation found evidence of coordinated lobbying efforts targeting specific congressional offices, with the goal of initiating investigations that would provide cover for the conspiracy's attacks on veteran businesses." As the hearing continued, the facade that Cromwell had built began collapsing in real time. Other committee members, realizing they had been manipulated, began asking increasingly hostile questions about the conspiracy. Senator James Harrison of Texas, himself a veteran, was particularly pointed. "Mr. Blackwood, are you telling this committee that a Marine who served 3 tours in Afghanistan and built a cybersecurity company that protects our national infrastructure is somehow less qualified than executives who've never served their country in any capacity?" James Blackwood, Cromwell's CEO, had been forced to appear after the FBI investigation became public. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by the defensive posture of someone who knew his career was over. "Senator, we never questioned Mr. Rodriguez's service record. We questioned whether his business practices—" "His business practices," Senator Harrison interrupted. "You mean the practices that earned his company recognition from the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the White House. The practices that resulted in a Presidential Medal of Freedom." Marcus watched from the witness table as Cromwell's conspiracy unraveled on national television. But more than personal vindication, he felt satisfaction knowing that this exposure would protect thousands of other veteran entrepreneurs from similar attacks. That evening, back at 1247 Maple Grove Drive, Marcus received a call that surprised him. It was from his Aunt Maria, who had been watching the hearing coverage. "Marcus, mijo, I need to tell you something. Your parents called me today." Marcus tensed. He hadn't spoken to his parents since they'd been released from prison, and he had no desire to start now. "They saw the hearing," Aunt Maria continued. "They saw how you handled yourself, how you defended not just your own business but all those other families. Your father," he cried, Marcus. "He said he finally understood what kind of man you'd become, and what kind of man he'd failed to be." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to say, Tia? I'm not asking you to forgive them. I'm just telling you that even they can see the difference between what they did and what you've accomplished. You turned their betrayal into protection for thousands of families. That's not just success, mijo. That's redemption of the highest kind." After ending the call, Marcus walked through his house, the house that had been stolen, reclaimed and transformed into the headquarters of an empire built on integrity. His grandmother's photo smiled at him from the mantelpiece, surrounded by new pictures. Emma with her daughter, Marcus Jr. at his college graduation, Sophia in her Air Force uniform, and Jessica receiving an award for her victim advocacy work. David Chen called with an update that confirmed what Marcus already knew. Cromwell's stock price has dropped 60% since the hearing. James Blackwood has been fired, and their board is discussing bankruptcy. 3 other conspiracy members have already reached out about plea agreements. What about Robert Martinez? Your cousin is facing disbarment proceedings and potential criminal charges for conspiracy and witness tampering. The State Bar Association is treating this as a landmark case about attorney misconduct. Marcus nodded, feeling no satisfaction from his cousin's downfall, only the grim completion of a necessary task. David, I want to make something clear. This was never about destroying Cromwell or getting revenge on my family. This was about protecting the integrity of veteran entrepreneurship and ensuring that what happened to those 47 businesses never happens again. I know, and that's exactly why you won. You didn't fight for yourself, you fought for principles. That's why the entire veteran business community rallied behind you. As Marcus ended the call, he realized that this battle had transformed him once again. 15 years ago, he'd been a veteran fighting to reclaim his stolen property. Now he'd become the defender of an entire community's right to earn success through merit, rather than connections. The house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive had witnessed another victory, but more importantly, it had served as the foundation for a movement that would protect thousands of families from the kind of attacks that had once threatened to destroy his own. The war was almost over, but the mission to protect others was just beginning to reach its full potential. Marcus Rodriguez stood before the largest gathering of veteran entrepreneurs in American history. The Denver Convention Center was packed with over 5,000 attendees for the inaugural Veterans Business Protection Summit, an annual event that had grown out of the conspiracy case that had nearly destroyed his company. At 51, Marcus had evolved from a single veteran fighting for his stolen house to the acknowledged leader of a movement that was fundamentally changing how veteran entrepreneurs were protected and supported in civilian business. 2 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. A criminal conspiracy tried to destroy veteran-owned businesses by convincing America that our success was somehow illegitimate. Today, I want to share what we've accomplished since we exposed their lies. Behind him, a massive screen displayed statistics that would have been unimaginable when his journey began. The Rodriguez Institute had expanded to operate in all 50 states, with a budget of $200 million annually. The Veterans Business Protection Act, passed by Congress 6 months after the hearing, had created federal protections and oversight specifically designed to prevent the kind of attacks Marcus and 47 other businesses had endured. In the past 2 years, we've helped launch 1,200 veteran-owned businesses, protected 847 companies from various forms of attack, and recovered over $50 million in stolen assets for military families, Marcus continued. But more importantly, we've changed the conversation about what veteran entrepreneurship means in America. In the front row sat his family, now truly united by shared purpose rather than just blood relations. Jessica had become one of the nation's leading experts on business fraud prevention, and her Rodriguez Family Protection Foundation had merged with Marcus's institute to create the most comprehensive veteran business support network in history. Sophia, now a major in the Air Force Cyber Command, was completing her final year of military service before joining the family mission full-time. Marcus Jr. had just been promoted to Chief Technology Officer of the expanded Sentinel Defense Solutions, which now employed over 400 people across 12 locations. Emma, with her MIT credentials and growing reputation as a cybersecurity researcher, had accepted Marcus's invitation to head the Institute's new International Veterans Program, extending their protection model to allied nations whose veteran entrepreneurs faced similar challenges. The destruction of the conspiracy had been swift and complete. Cromwell Defense Systems had filed for bankruptcy 18 months earlier, with James Blackwood facing a 15-year federal prison sentence for racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud. The other 5 companies in the Defense Industry Stability Coalition had either disbanded or been acquired by legitimate competitors. But perhaps more satisfying than the criminal convictions was the systemic change that had emerged from the scandal. The Department of Defense had implemented new oversight procedures for contract competitions, designed to prevent discrimination against veteran and minority-owned businesses. 3 major business schools had created case studies about the conspiracy, teaching future executives about the legal and ethical boundaries of competitive behavior. Robert Martinez, Marcus's cousin who had led the legal attack, had been disbarred and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His law firm had collapsed, and his attempts to blame Cromwell for misleading him had been rejected by both the courts and his former legal colleagues. The most important lesson from the conspiracy case, Marcus told the summit audience, isn't that we defeated our enemies, it's that we used their attack as motivation to build something that will protect future generations of veteran entrepreneurs. The recognition Marcus received had extended far beyond American borders. NATO had invited him to establish similar veteran business protection programs in member nations, recognizing that the skills developed through military service translated into civilian business success regardless of nationality. The European Union had created the Rodriguez Protocol for protecting veteran entrepreneurs from coordinated business attacks, and Australia had modeled their new veteran business legislation directly on the American Veterans Business Protection Act. "What we've learned," Marcus explained to the international delegation attending the summit, "is that the attacks on veteran businesses aren't unique to America. In every developed nation, there are established business interests that see veteran entrepreneurship as a threat to their market dominance." Dr. Elizabeth Hartmann, representing the German Federal Ministry of Economics, responded from the audience, "Herr Rodriguez, the model you have created has inspired similar programs across Europe. We have documented 43 cases where your protocols prevented attacks on veteran businesses in Germany alone." That evening, at the summit's closing dinner, Marcus found himself in conversation with Danny Sullivan, the man who had once tried to intimidate him in his own driveway and who was now working as a construction foreman and had started a small contracting business specifically focused on veteran housing projects. "Mr. Rodriguez," Danny said, approaching Marcus's table with obvious nervousness, "I wanted to thank you for the loan program recommendation. The Rodriguez Institute helped me get the capital to start my business, even though I didn't deserve your help." Marcus studied the man who had once threatened his family. Danny looked healthy, successful, and genuinely transformed by the years of consequences and hard work that had followed their confrontation. "Danny, what you deserved was the chance to prove you could change. The loan program gave you that chance. What you did with it was up to you. I've been clean for 6 years now, married a good woman, bought a house, even started going to church." Danny paused, clearly struggling with emotion. "That day at your house, when you could have destroyed me but chose restraint instead, that taught me something about real strength that prison never could." Marcus nodded, remembering his grandmother's lessons about the difference between justice and revenge. "The strongest thing you can do is give people the opportunity to become better than they were." Later that night, back at 1247 Maple Grove Drive, Marcus sat in his study with his grandniece Elena, now a precocious 4-year-old who had inherited the family intelligence and curiosity. She was playing with blocks on the floor while Marcus reviewed proposals for the Institute's next expansion phase. "Tío Marcus," she said, using the Spanish term for uncle that connected her to her great-great-grandmother's heritage, "why do people try to steal things that belong to other people?" Marcus looked down at the little girl who carried his grandmother's name and wondered how to explain complex concepts of greed, entitlement, and systemic corruption to a 4-year-old. "Sometimes, Elena, people think it's easier to take what someone else has built than to build something themselves. But what they don't understand is that taking things doesn't make you strong. Building things makes you strong. Like how you built your big company, like how our whole family learned to build things together instead of taking things from each other." Elena nodded seriously, then returned to her blocks. But Marcus noticed that she was building a house, a small replica of the Victorian home that had become the symbol of everything their family had learned about integrity, perseverance, and the difference between earned success and stolen property. The next week brought news that Marcus had been selected to receive the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor Congress can bestow in recognition of his contributions to veteran entrepreneurship and business integrity. The ceremony would take place at the Capitol, with the medal presented by the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. Marcus would be only the 3rd veteran entrepreneur in American history to receive the honor, joining the ranks of individuals whose contributions had fundamentally changed American society. But as meaningful as the recognition was, Marcus found himself thinking about his grandmother Elena, who had died before seeing any of the success that had grown from the values she'd instilled in him. "She knew," Jessica said when Marcus shared his thoughts with his sister, "Grandma Elena always knew you would do something important with your life. She just didn't know it would start with our family trying to steal your house." "Maybe that was the point," Marcus replied. "Maybe she knew that the real test of character isn't what you do when everything goes right. It's what you do when the people closest to you betray everything you believe in." As he prepared for the congressional ceremony, Marcus realized that his journey from betrayed veteran to national leader had taught him the most important lesson of all. True victory isn't about defeating your enemies, it's about building something so strong and principled that it transforms everyone it touches, including your former enemies. The house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive had been the foundation for that transformation. Now it was time to see how far that foundation could support the dreams of future generations. The mission was expanding beyond anything Marcus had ever imagined, and he was ready for whatever came next. The rotunda of the United States Capitol had never been more packed for a congressional gold medal ceremony. Representatives, senators, military leaders, business executives, and hundreds of veteran entrepreneurs filled every available space as Marcus Rodriguez prepared to receive the nation's highest civilian honor. At 51, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity that had defined his entire journey, from the young soldier discovering his stolen house to the national leader who had transformed veteran entrepreneurship in America. His family sat in the front row, Jessica with her 3 children, now all accomplished adults, Sophia in her Air Force dress uniform, Marcus Jr. with his wife and 2 young children, and Emma holding 4-year-old Elena, who wore a miniature version of her great-great-grandmother's favorite dress. Speaker of the House Margaret Chen, no relation to David Chen, though the coincidence had become a running joke, approached the podium as the ceremony began. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to honor a man whose response to personal betrayal created a movement that has protected thousands of American families and transformed how our nation supports veteran entrepreneurship. The speaker's words echoed through the rotunda as she recounted Marcus's journey, the property theft, the legal battles, the business success, and ultimately the exposure of the criminal conspiracy that had targeted veteran-owned businesses across the nation. Marcus Rodriguez could have chosen bitterness when his family stole his childhood home. He could have chosen revenge when competitors tried to destroy his reputation. Instead, he chose to build, to create institutions and protections that ensure no other veteran entrepreneur will face the challenges he overcame. As the ceremony continued, Marcus noticed figures in the audience he hadn't expected to see. Mrs. Patterson, now 88 and in a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, had been brought by her grandchildren to witness the honor given to the boy she'd watched grow up next door. More surprising was the presence of his parents, Robert and Linda Rodriguez, now in their late 70s. They sat in the back rows, having contacted Jessica weeks earlier to ask if they could attend. Marcus had agreed, though he had no intention of speaking with them. But the most unexpected presence was Agent Sarah Mitchell, now retired from the FBI, who had played such a crucial role in both the original property theft case and the recent conspiracy investigation. She sat with David Chen and their spouses, representing the team of professionals who had helped Marcus navigate the legal challenges that had defined his journey. The citation reading, Senator James Harrison of Texas, the veteran who had been so supportive during the conspiracy hearings, read the official citation. The Congress of the United States presents this gold medal to Marcus Rodriguez in recognition of his extraordinary contributions to veteran entrepreneurship, his creation of comprehensive protections for military families against financial exploitation, and his demonstration that integrity and perseverance in the face of betrayal can create lasting positive change for countless American families. The citation continued. Through the Rodriguez Institute for Military Family Protection, the Veterans Business Protection Act, and his personal example of transforming adversity into service to others, Marcus Rodriguez has embodied the highest ideals of American citizenship and veteran leadership. As Senator Harrison spoke, Marcus thought about the long journey from that evening 15 years ago when he'd stood in the gas station parking lot, discovering that his family had betrayed him. Every challenge, every setback, every victory had led to this moment. Not just personal recognition, but acknowledgement that the principles his grandmother had taught him could indeed change the world. Speaker Chen called Marcus forward, and as he approached the podium, the entire rotunda rose in sustained applause. The gold medal itself was magnificent, a work of art that would join the Presidential Medal of Freedom in his study at 1247 Maple Grove Drive. But more meaningful than the medal was what it represented: validation that his response to family betrayal had created something larger than personal success. Mr. Rodriguez, Speaker Chen said as she placed the medal around his neck, your journey from stolen property to national leadership proves that America's greatest strength lies not in our ability to avoid adversity, but in our capacity to transform it into service to others. As Marcus stepped to the podium to deliver his acceptance remarks, he looked out at an audience that represented 15 years of building relationships, fighting for principles, and creating institutions that would outlast his own lifetime. Thank you for this incredible honor, he began. But I want to be clear about something. This medal doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every veteran entrepreneur who refused to accept that military service was somehow incompatible with business success. It belongs to every military family who faced betrayal and chose integrity over revenge. And it belongs to every person who believed that building something positive was better than tearing something down. He paused, looking at his family in the front row. 15 years ago, when I discovered that my family had stolen my childhood home while I served overseas, I had a choice. I could let that betrayal define me, or I could use it as motivation to build something better. The rotunda was absolutely silent as Marcus continued. My grandmother Elena Rodriguez taught me that character isn't measured by what happens to you, it's measured by what you choose to do with what happens to you. She never lived to see this honor, but her values are the foundation of everything we've built. Marcus pulled out a worn photo from his jacket pocket, the same picture of his grandmother that had sat on his desk through every challenge and triumph. This photo has been with me through 3 combat deployments, multiple legal battles, business expansions, and family crises. It reminds me every day that success without integrity is just elaborate failure. I want to share something with you that I've never said publicly before, Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed rotunda. When my parents and sister betrayed me, I felt like I had lost my family forever. I thought family was supposed to be about unconditional loyalty, about blood being thicker than water. He looked directly at Jessica, who was crying openly in the front row. But what I learned is that real family isn't about blood, it's about shared values. It's about people who build each other up rather than tear each other down. It's about choosing to protect rather than exploit. Marcus gestured toward the audience. The veteran entrepreneur community has become my real family. The military families we've protected have become my real family. The people who choose integrity over convenience, service over selfishness, they are my real family. Today, I want to issue a challenge to everyone in this room and everyone watching this ceremony, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. Don't wait for betrayal to teach you about character. Don't wait for crisis to discover your principles. Choose today to be the person who builds rather than destroys, who protects rather than exploits, who serves rather than takes. He looked up at the Rotunda Dome, where the paintings depicted the founding moments of American democracy. This nation was built by people who chose to create something better rather than accept something broken. Every generation faces that same choice. Today, I'm asking you to choose building, choose protection, choose service. As Marcus concluded his remarks, the entire rotunda erupted in the longest standing ovation in Congressional Gold Medal ceremony history. 5 minutes of sustained applause that echoed off the marble walls and represented not just recognition of his achievements, but commitment to the principles he represented. As the applause finally died down, Marcus noticed his parents approaching. For a moment he tensed, uncertain what they might say or do. His father, Robert, looked older and frailer than Marcus remembered, but his eyes were clear as he extended his hand. "Son," he said quietly, "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that watching you today made me understand what kind of man I should have been." Marcus looked at his father, the man who had helped steal his house, who had spent years in prison as a result, who had never before acknowledged the pain he'd caused. "Dad," Marcus said finally, "I can't change what happened between us, but I can choose what happens next." They shook hands, not as father and son reconciling, but as 2 men acknowledging the difference between the paths they'd chosen. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to disperse, Marcus found himself surrounded by the family he'd built through shared values rather than shared blood. Jessica, Sophia, Marcus Jr., Emma, and little Elena formed a circle around him, along with Mrs. Patterson, Agent Mitchell, David Chen, and dozens of other people who had been part of his journey. The Congressional Gold Medal was the highest honor America could bestow. But standing in that circle, Marcus realized he'd already received the greatest honor possible, the knowledge that his response to betrayal had created protection for thousands of families, and a legacy that would outlast his own lifetime. The ceremony was over, but the mission would continue forever. Elena Rodriguez Chen stood on the front porch of 1247 Maple Grove Drive, her hand resting on the same railing her great-great-grandmother had carved by hand over a century ago. At 29, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that had become the Rodriguez family trademark, a blend of humility and unshakable integrity that had transformed not just one family, but an entire nation's approach to veteran entrepreneurship. Today marked the 25th anniversary of the day her great-uncle Marcus had discovered his stolen house, and Elena was about to make an announcement that would surprise even the family members gathered in the Victorian home that had become a pilgrimage site for veterans worldwide. 25 years ago, Elena began, addressing the crowd of family, friends, and media assembled on the lawn. My great-uncle Marcus returned from Afghanistan to find that his family had stolen his childhood home. That betrayal could have destroyed him. Instead, it became the foundation for a legacy that has protected over 100,000 military families and launched more than 50,000 veteran-owned businesses. The house behind her gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, carefully maintained as both a family home and the headquarters of what had become the largest veteran protection organization in world history. The Rodriguez Institute now operated in 47 countries, with an annual budget of $2 billion and a staff of over 10,000 people dedicated to protecting military families from exploitation. Today, I want to share something that Uncle Marcus never told anyone, not even his closest family members. Elena continued, her voice carrying clearly across the lawn. Before he died last year, he left detailed instructions about the true purpose of everything he built. Elena pulled out a handwritten letter, its pages yellowed with age, dated exactly 1 year earlier. "My dear family," she read aloud, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, but our mission continues. There is something I need you to know about why I responded to my family's betrayal the way I did." The crowd grew silent as Elena continued reading her great-uncle's final message. "When I discovered that my parents and sister had stolen my house, my first instinct was revenge. I wanted to destroy them the way they had tried to destroy me. I was angry, hurt, and ready to use every skill the military had taught me to make them pay." Elena paused, looking at her audience: Jessica, now 68 and still leading victim advocacy programs; Sophia, a retired Air Force general who had become the Institute's director of operations; Marcus Jr., whose cybersecurity innovations had prevented billions in fraud, and hundreds of families whose lives had been transformed by the Rodriguez legacy. But then I remembered something my grandmother Elena had told me when I was 8 years old, shortly before she died. She said, "Mijo, the measure of a man isn't how he treats people who have power over him or people who can do things for him. The measure of a man is how he treats people who have hurt him when he has the power to hurt them back." Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued reading Marcus's letter. "Every decision I made, the legal response instead of violence, building businesses instead of seeking revenge, protecting other families instead of just reclaiming my own property, all of it was because Grandma Elena had taught me that true strength isn't about making your enemies pay. True strength is about making sure their children never become your enemies." The crowd was absolutely silent now, understanding that they were hearing something profound about the philosophy that had guided one of the most successful veteran entrepreneurs in American history. "I could have destroyed my parents and sister financially, legally, emotionally. I had the resources, the connections, the justification, but I chose a different path because I realized something that changed everything. The cycle of betrayal and revenge only stops when someone chooses to break it." Elena looked up from the letter, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He forgave them," she said simply, "not because they deserved it, but because forgiveness was the only way to ensure that the poison of betrayal didn't pass to the next generation." Elena set down the letter and pulled out another document, a legal paper that had been sealed for 25 years. In this document, Uncle Marcus left specific instructions about what should happen to his estate upon his death. The Rodriguez Institute, valued at over $5 billion, was to be donated entirely to a new foundation with a very specific mission. She unfolded the document, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The Marcus and Elena Rodriguez Foundation for Family Reconciliation will provide free counseling, mediation, and financial assistance to families torn apart by betrayal, fraud, and exploitation. Its primary mission will be to prove that forgiveness and rebuilding are more powerful than revenge and destruction. The implications hit the audience like a thunderclap. Marcus had spent 25 years building an empire, not for personal wealth, but to create the ultimate demonstration that choosing construction over destruction could literally change the world. "But there's more," Elena continued, her voice now carrying the authority of someone delivering a message that would reshape how people thought about justice, forgiveness, and family. Uncle Marcus left one final instruction. This house, 12407 Maple Grove Drive, is to be converted into a training center where families learning to reconcile after betrayal can come to see living proof that forgiveness and integrity are more powerful than revenge and bitterness. Elena pulled out one final document, A photograph of Marcus as a young soldier, standing next to his grandmother Elena on the very porch where Elena now stood. 25 years ago, when his family stole this house, Marcus had a choice. He could become a victim, defined by what others had done to him. He could become a villain, using his pain as justification for causing pain to others. Or he could become a victor, not by defeating his enemies, but by transforming the entire concept of what victory means. She held up the photograph for everyone to see. He chose victory, and his definition of victory was this: building something so strong, so positive, so protective of others, that even the people who betrayed him would eventually benefit from what he created. The crowd was completely silent, many people crying openly as they understood the full magnitude of what Marcus Rodriguez had accomplished. 3 months before he died, Uncle Marcus received a letter from our grandmother, his sister Jessica's youngest granddaughter. She was starting college and needed financial assistance. The Rodriguez Foundation provided a full scholarship, just like it had for hundreds of other students whose families had been helped by Uncle Marcus's programs. Elena's voice broke slightly as she delivered the final revelation. That granddaughter never knew that the scholarship came from the uncle her grandmother had once betrayed. Uncle Marcus never told her. He just made sure she had the same opportunities for education and success that his grandmother Elena had always believed every family member deserved. Elena folded the documents and looked directly at her audience, delivering the moral lesson that would be remembered long after the ceremony ended. The lesson Uncle Marcus left us isn't about business success or legal victories or even justice being served. The lesson is this: the most powerful thing you can do to an enemy is refuse to let them turn you into someone like them. She gestured toward the house behind her. This house was stolen through greed, betrayal, and lies. It was reclaimed through patience, integrity, and legal action. But its true victory came through something much more powerful. It became the foundation for protecting thousands of families from the same kind of betrayal. Elena's voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of a moral truth that transcended the specific story of one family's journey. When someone hurts you, you have 3 choices. You can hurt them back, which makes you like them. You can let the hurt define you, which gives them power over your future. Or you can use the hurt as motivation to build something so positive that it transforms not just your own life, but the lives of countless others who never even knew your name. As Elena concluded her remarks, she walked to the exact spot where Marcus had stood 25 years earlier, discovering that his family had betrayed him. On this spot, a young veteran could have chosen bitterness, revenge, or despair. Instead, he chose to prove that integrity, forgiveness, and the decision to build rather than destroy could literally change the world. She pulled out a key, the same key Marcus had used to first enter his reclaimed house. Today, this key opens the door to the Family Reconciliation Center, where betrayed families will learn what Uncle Marcus proved, that the strongest people aren't those who win wars against their enemies, but those who refuse to let their enemies turn them into warriors at all. Elena turned the key in the lock of 12047 Maple Grove Drive, and as the door opened, sunlight streamed through the house, illuminating a banner inside that read, "Welcome home, where broken families learn to build again." The crowd stood in complete silence, many people speechless as they absorbed the full moral weight of what they had witnessed. Marcus Rodriguez had taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into the greatest demonstration of human character in recent memory. He had proven that forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was the ultimate strength. He had shown that true victory wasn't about defeating your enemies, it was about building something so powerful and positive that it transformed even your enemies into beneficiaries of your success. And in the end, the house at 1247 Maple Grove Drive stood not as a symbol of property reclaimed, but as eternal proof that choosing love over hate, construction over destruction, and forgiveness over revenge could literally change the world. In a world that teaches us to fight fire with fire, Marcus Rodriguez proved that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is building something so magnificent that even your betrayers benefit from what you create. True strength isn't measured by your ability to destroy your enemies, it's measured by your ability to build something so positive that your enemies' children thank you for it. The house was never really about the house. It was about proving that integrity, perseverance, and the choice to build rather than destroy can transform not just one life, but thousands of lives across generations. When someone steals from you, betrays you, or tries to destroy you, you have the power to choose who you become in response. Choose to become someone your grandmother would be proud of. Choose to become someone who builds rather than destroys. Choose to become living proof that good defeats evil, not through warfare, but through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let evil change who you are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.